Good morning, Sergeants. Please start your recordings.
Computer recording started.
Recording to the cloud, all set. Good morning, and welcome to the remote hearing on education. For council members and staff, please turn on their video at this time. Thank you. Minimize disruptions. Please place your cell phones, electronics to vibrate. To send testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Once again, that's testimony@council.nyc.gov. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. So my gavel. Good morning and welcome to today's virtual education committee on foster care students in DOE system. I am Rita Joseph, chair of the education committee. This is the first time that the education committee has held a hearing on students in foster care, a subject that is very close and dear to my heart, as I've been a foster parent for 5 years and an adopted parent for 4. So I know all too well the challenges faced by foster children. Most children in foster care have suffered extreme trauma in their lives, having been removed from their home and family in response to exposure to some type of danger, such as physical abuse or neglect. While some children may be placed with relatives, others are placed with virtual strangers in foster home, groups homes, or other residential facilities. Children in foster care often move to different foster homes and placements, sometimes resulting in transfers to new schools. And with each school change, foster care students can lose up to 6 months of academic progress. In addition, research shows that students in foster care have lower test scores as well as higher rates of absenteeism, suspension, and grade retention, and more likely to drop out of school than any other students. And according to advocates, about half of the students in foster care in New York City have a disability requiring special education services. This extremely vulnerable student population has largely been overlooked and ignored by the New York City Department of Education for many years. Not only have the needs of the student in foster care have not been met, we don't even know how many are currently enrolled in city schools. Because the DOE doesn't have a report, because the DOE doesn't report any data about students in foster care. Further, while DOE has long had an office of students in temporary housing to address the needs of homeless students, they have never had an office or staff members focused solely on meeting the needs of students in foster care. In 2016, the council passed the local law that required city to create an interagency foster care task, which issued a report in 2018 recommending that the DOE create an infrastructure to focus on students in foster care, similar to the Office of Students in Temporary Housing. Still, the DOE did nothing until more than 3 years later, when advocates and child welfare organizations successfully lobbied then Mayor de Blasio last spring to allocate funding in the fiscal 2022 budget to create the office and provide other supports and services for these students. Last December, the DOE finally committed to hire the first ever team of full-time staffers focused on students in foster care. According to the press report, DOE initial plan was to hire half the new staff by the end of January and the rest by the end of June. But as far as we know, not a single staff member has been hired yet. In the meantime, students in foster care continue to go unmet, especially transportation needs. Federal law requires school district to provide transportation between a child's foster care placement and their school so students can stay in their original school unless it's determined to be in their best interest to transfer. Transferring schools cause additional disruption in the lives of children in foster care, while remaining in the original school can provide a critical source of academic and emotional stability. Yet the DOE doesn't currently guarantee bus service or comparable transportation to students in foster care, except those who have designated to receive special education transportation and those who can easily be added to an existing bus route. This lack of transportation forced some of the students in foster care to transfer schools because a MetroCard doesn't help children too young to travel alone, and many foster parents are unable to transport children back and forth to school every day. Transferring schools provide extra challenges for students in foster care, since approximately half have a disability, making it more difficult to find a school that can meet their special education needs. Additionally, receiving schools has discretion over how many credits are granted for coursework from the sending school, which have a negative impact on students in foster care. It is also important to note that COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted the academic, social, and emotional difficulties already faced by students in foster care. For children who have previously experienced so much disruption in their lives, the switch to full-time remote learning and the loss of stability offered by the school environment and the comfort of being familiar with adults and peers was devastating. At today's hearing, the committee hopes to learn more information about students in foster care and city schools and what DOE has been doing to meet their extensive needs, particularly in the area of transportation. We'd like to hear details about the plans to establish a new unit with a full-time staff members dedicated solely to the needs of students in foster care, as well as any progress made in hiring that staff and obstacles stand in the way of that effort. I want to thank everyone who's testifying today. I want to thank the City Council staff for all the work they put in today's hearing. Malcolm Butehorn, Jan Atwell, Chelsea Bademore, Masih Sarsiskian, and Frank Perez. I also want to thank my staff, Sam Weinberger and Connor Irving. Now I turn over to today's moderator, Malcolm Butehorn, counsel to the committee.
Thank you, Chair Joseph. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Malcolm Butehorn, and I am counsel to the Education Committee. I would first like to acknowledge council members present for the record. We are joined today so far by council members Schulman, Ung, Brewer, Abreu, Stevens, Hanif, and Lee. Before we begin testimony, I want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you are called on to testify. I will be calling on public witnesses to testify in panels after the conclusion of the administration's testimony and council member questions. Council members who have questions should use the raise hand function in Zoom. You will be called on in the order with which you raised your hand after the full panel has completed testimony. We will be limiting council member questions to 5 minutes. And please note, for the purposes of this hearing, we will not be allowing a second round. For public witnesses, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you and the Sergeant at Arms will give you the go-ahead to begin after setting the timer. So please listen for that cue. For fairness for all present, all public testimony will be limited to 5 minutes per person. The following members of the administration are here to testify and or answer questions today. From the New York City Department of Education, Dr. Joanna Johnson, Chief of School Culture, Climate, and Wellbeing; Sarah Jonas, Senior Executive Director, Office of Community Schools; Flavia Puello Perdomo, Chief Executive; Michael Hickey, Executive Director, Students in Temporary Housing; Donna Brailsford, Citywide Coordinator for Child Abuse Prevention; Glenn Risbrook, Executive Director, Office of Pupil Transportation; Jody Salmons-Chen, Chief of Staff, Division of School Operations; John Hammer, Chief Executive Director, Special Education Office; and from the New York City Administration for Children's Services, Deputy Commissioner Julie Farber, Family Permanency Services. I will first read the oath, and after I will call on each member from the administration individually to respond. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Dr. Johnson?
I do.
Sarah Jonas?
I do.
Flavia Puello Perdomo?
I do.
Thank you. Michael Hickey?
I do.
Donna Brailsford?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Glenn Risbrook?
I do.
Jody Salmons-Chen?
I do.
Mr. John Hammer?
I do.
And Deputy Commissioner Farber?
I do.
Thank you. Dr. Johnson, you may begin when ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Joseph and the members of the Education Committee here today. My name is Dr. Joanna Johnson, and I am the Chief of School Culture, Climate, and Wellbeing at the Department of Education. I lead New York City's public schools' effort to support our students' social, emotional development and wellness including specialized assistance for some of our most vulnerable students. Those include our students in foster care, who we know face many challenges outside of school and require help dedicated to their needs in school. We share the council's commitment to ensuring that students in foster care receive all the support they need to succeed, and we thank you for the opportunity to discuss this important issue. Joining me today are our partners at the Administration for Children's Services is Deputy Commissioner Julie Farber and other leaders from the DOE as introduced and sworn in. Before I begin my testimony, I would like to thank Chair Joseph and the City Council for your leadership on behalf of children in foster care. I would also like to thank the many advocates, nonprofits, and city agency partners that continue to support our students in foster care. We are looking forward to continuing to collaborate with you to best serve these students. I am a lifelong educator, having served proudly as a teacher, school leader in both DOE and charter schools, and am now honored to be leading the following New York City public school offices: Safety and Youth Development, School Wellness Programs, the Public School Athletic League, and Community Schools. We are committed to offering an ecosystem of care for the whole child that prioritizes student well-being, ensures physical and emotional safety, and supports students in reaching their full potential. We understand the elevated needs of our vulnerable students, including students in foster care, and are redoubling our efforts to ensure that we are meeting the social, emotional, and academic needs of these and other vulnerable student populations in each of our schools. My team oversees the work of 4 offices dedicated to uplifting and advancing this vision for better meeting the needs of the whole child. And we are eager to move forward with creating a new foster care team under my leadership. These offices may seem to have vast and varying portfolio, but at their core is a commitment to whole child wellness. This means we support both the physical and mental well-being of all of our students, thus nurturing their healthy bodies and minds. Chancellor Banks has articulated a dynamic vision for transforming the Department of Education to lay the foundation for bright starts and bold futures for all New York City public school students. As the Chancellor has made clear, our students need to leave our schools with the knowledge and skills that will propel them towards successful careers and enable them to be engaged members of their communities. The trauma and instability of foster care that our students in foster care have experienced in many instances has led to lower attendance and graduation rates amongst this group. And we realize that this is an area that we must work hard to significantly improve. Children in foster care are highly talented and resilient scholars who need our support. We fully recognize that there is much work to be done in collaboration with our agency partners and nonprofit providers to not only improve academic outcomes, but the overall well-being of these students. I want to take a moment to share a little background on students in foster care. When a child has been abused or neglected, to protect their safety and best interests, a family court judge can order that the child be removed from his or her home and be placed in foster care. The New York City Administration for Children's Services manages the city's foster care system, and there are currently just over 7,000 students in foster care, down from nearly 13,000 a decade ago, and from over 40,000 20 years ago. More than half of the children who enter foster care today are placed with kin, meaning relatives or close family friends. The remaining children mostly live in family foster care homes with caring New Yorkers, with about 600 youth living in residential foster care facilities. Children in foster care live throughout the 5 boroughs. Almost every one of our 1,600 schools has at least a small number of enrolled students in foster care, and a few of our schools, including our transfer schools, serve a significant number of these students. We collaborate in deep partnership with our colleagues at ACS and in the foster care agencies, and we trust our colleagues in ACS and the foster care agencies to make decisions in the best interest of these students in partnership with our team. The Every Student Succeed Act of 2015 mandates that local educational agencies like the New York City Department of Education and child welfare agencies collaborate to support educational stability for children in for children in foster care and provide these students with the opportunity to achieve at the same level as their peers. While each of these students faces unique challenges, every student in foster care has the right to receive a public education, to stay in their current school or choose to attend a new school, to enroll immediately in a new school if it is determined that it is not in their best interest to stay at the original school, to receive transportation services to and from school, and to access comparable educational services. In order to ensure these rights are enforced, currently, every school has a designated liaison for foster care students who serves as a point person to serve these students and their families. The designated liaison facilitates interagency communication and the sharing of student information amongst the school, ACS, and the foster care agency. Designated liaisons participate every year in trainings on foster care and meeting the needs of these students that include instructions on providing information to foster care agency, ensuring that students receive programs they are eligible for, tracking credit for previous work, and understanding the rights of parents to be involved. When a child enters foster care, the foster care agency and ACS notifies the child's school-based designated liaison within 24 hours. Using a best interest standard, the child welfare system makes the final decision around whether a child should stay at the school of origin before entering foster care or move to another one. If a transfer is deemed necessary, the DOE works with ACS to facilitate this transfer and secure transportation services to their new school if needed. The overwhelming majority of children entering foster care, nearly 86% in the school year of 2020-2021, remain in their original schools. When a student in foster care transfers schools, the designated liaison also works with that student to ensure that they receive all necessary services and programs that that child is entitled to, and that the student's grades or credits are transferred over. Additionally, for students in foster care who are in grades K through 8, kindergarten through 8th grade, schools must designate someone to monitor their attendance. If a child in foster care missed a day of school without an adequately explained absence, the attendance monitor conducts the necessary follow-up action regarding family outreach, escalating concerns to the foster care agency or ACS and reporting the absence in the DOE record system. Our schools do a good job of ensuring that these rights are met, but we need to go beyond what these children are legally entitled to give them what they rightly deserve. Pursuing the Chancellor's vision, we want to boldly re-envision what we can do in service of our children in foster care. Transportation services are critical to ensuring students in foster care are able to get to school. While there are some challenges, DOE provides busing or comparable alternative transportation for all students in foster care who are in grades K through 6 and placed within the 5 boroughs, as well as those with IEPs for busing. If we are unable to find a bus route initially, we provide public transportation or transportation reimbursement until we can find a bus route. Fortunately, we are able to provide busing to the vast majority of students in foster care, and the DOE works collaboratively with ACS and foster care agencies to address transportation needs. We welcome the opportunity to work collaboratively to further strengthen transportation options for students in foster care. Across our system, we continue to invest deeply in the mental health and well-being of our students and school communities. With the Council's leadership and partnership, we have worked to ensure that every school has access to a social worker and mental health support services. Every school benefits from these resources, including our students in foster care, who now have greater access to mental health and social emotional assistance at school, more so than ever before. Students in foster care also receive additional help from ACS and its foster care providers, along with support from the support and guidance of the Fair Futures Coalition, the Youth Board and funders through the Fair Futures program. Through Fair Futures, thousands of young people in foster care ages 11 to 21 receive coaching, tutoring, educational advocacy, and employment and housing assistance. The goal of Fair Futures is to help prepare students for major transitions, including from elementary to middle to high school, as well as the transition from high school to college, vocational training, and/or careers. Successfully navigating these crucial passages puts these students on a path to success after they leave foster care. We as a city need to ensure that every student in our child welfare system has access to caring adults in the school building, a trauma-responsive school setting where teachers are well informed about the demands that foster care places on children and families, mental health support services, and whole child wellness assistance. We have made significant strides in bringing these support systems to schools for all of our students and are now making investments to more holistically lift up our foster care students. For the first time, the Department of Education is creating an office exclusively dedicated to supporting the needs of students in foster care. The Office of Foster Care will seek to meet the complex needs of students in foster care by developing innovative policies to support schools. This office is a subset of our current Students in Temporary Housing team under the Office of Community Schools, which is a natural fit because it will draw from existing knowledge, resources, and capacity, and is best positioned to make substantial and positive impact on students in foster care. We are in the process of hiring 4 individuals who will lay the foundation for this new foster care team. This office will have the ability to develop policy changes to better support students in foster care, create school-based professional learning opportunities and guidance so that our students in foster care attend schools and feel better equipped to be supported and advocated for by school staff. This office will also deepen partnerships with other city agencies and nonprofit providers so that high-quality youth services are provided to all foster care students and to build stronger connections with advocacy groups. I am confident we will find the right, thoughtful people who are also caring to work on this team and greatly appreciate the resources that have been provided. We know that our nation's largest school system can do better for our foster care students. As I have shared earlier, we have a vision for our school system where every school values each student's family situation while providing structure, stability, and whole child wellness supports, removing the major barriers that impede learning. We are continuing to invest in support systems throughout our schools that will benefit all students, including those in foster care, focusing on academics, mental health, college and career readiness, post-secondary pathway options, and more. Along with our new Office of Foster Care, these investments will cultivate more enriching experiences and better outcomes for our foster care students. I want to thank the Council for your support and attention to the needs of our students, particularly when it comes to their overall well-being. Thanks to the Council, we are making incredible strides in increasing mental health and social emotional learning support services for all students. We have successfully hired a number of social workers across the system and implemented social emotional learning screeners this fall, and we will have our second screening this spring. This has allowed schools to more successfully address the complex needs of all students, especially more than 2 years after the COVID-19 pandemic caused so much disruption and heartache. There is much more work to be done. And with this foster care office, we are in the beginning of this process. In collaboration with our city partners, we will reimagine what we can do to ensure our students in foster care get all the support they need. I am sincerely grateful for your leadership and collaboration in this effort, and we are happy to take questions at this time. Thank you.
Turn it over to you, Chair. Oh, you're on mute. Oh, I need to make you a co-host. Sorry. Hold on. There we
No
go. Okay.
worries, no worries. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for your testimony. Just for the record, I wanted to find out some basic data. Do you know how many students are enrolled in DOE schools and that are currently in foster care?
If you give me one moment, I will find that data for you. So we have 7,416 students who are in foster care.
How many students in foster care were enrolled in DOE school at any point last school year? Do you have that data as well?
If you give me a moment, I will look that up.
No problem.
And so while we are looking for that, I think as we look at that 7,416 students, what we found is that there was a greater concentration of young people in the boroughs of the Bronx, Manhattan, and Queens, representing nearly 75% collectively, and then Queens and Staten Island representing the smaller amount. And so slight correction, that number of 7,416 was for last year. That was for the 2020-2021 year. And we are gathering the finalized numbers for this year. One of the things I will say is, I'll pause for a second to give us a moment to gather that information.
All right, wonderful.
Okay.
As a former educator, you know that 22 years in the school system, I'm always in and out the school system. So it's a system that I know inside out. Why doesn't the DOE have any kind of data about students in foster care on your website? That's the section you have, one for students in temporary housing, but you have none for foster care. Can you elaborate on that for me?
No, I think that's a great question. I think one of the reasons why is because the number of students are disseminated and distributed across the school system. It's a little bit challenging to kind of collect and organize the data. It is one of the reasons why we have been pushing to get the office started. And one of the preliminary roles in this first phase of the work is a person to help us to organize, collate and organize the data position. So it is a data and capacity building position as part of the role.
Out of your 7,416, since you have no data, so you wouldn't have them categorized in age group and grade wise.
So we do have the data. We just don't have it publicly available. And with regard to the number of students in care this year, so as of March, we have 5,264 young people in foster care. And in terms of the breakdown, most of the data that I have will be for last year in terms of the breakdown by grade. And so roughly when we look at the age group of the majority of students are in the pre-K to 5 age band. And so they're about 45%, about 44.7% who are in the pre-K to 5 band. And then the next largest band is 29%. And that is high school. That's the 9 through 12. And then the remainder sit in the middle grades.
All right. You know, educators love to give themselves rubrics. How would the DOE rank themselves in terms of handling foster care? What's the rubric, 1 through 4?
1 through 4. What I would say is that we are approaching the standard.
Okay.
If I had to give us what I will say is this. I think we recognize that there are challenges with young people in foster care. I think we recognize that there are opportunities. We have the designated liaison. So we have some systems and some structures in place to provide some attention and some oversight to it, but there definitely is more that can be done. And when we think about the ways in which, when we think about the outcomes and the impact on the lives of the young people, we do recognize that there's more that can be done. And so what we are what we intend is for the Office of Foster Care to really allow us to have a more dedicated team to really look at some of the challenges and provide both guidance as well as some actual operational support to schools to really be able to address this population.
Earlier you mentioned something about kinship gap. Most people don't know what that is. That's when a foster care child is placed with a family member. Sometimes we find that in kin gaps, in kinships, that they're placed with older family members. For example, a grandmother, a grandfather, someone who's older. Sometimes it's difficult for that parent. They mean well, the grandparents mean well, because I've seen that a lot, especially and as an educator, I've seen where grandparents had to come in and take over. And without the proper support, they are lost. They mean well, but they are usually lost because they don't have any support or guidance. So that's why it's so important for this hearing today. Because I remember talking to the chancellor on March 21st. He was committed to hiring and putting this team together. And yet I have not heard anything. I know there was supposed to be a senior foster care support manager. So can you tell us each of the positions will you be posting and why they're not posting, why some are posted and some are not posted?
No, I think that's a great question. So we currently have, and thank you, Chair, for all of the questions that you've been asking. We have 4 positions that are currently posted. Those 4 positions are being, I'm sorry, it's taking me just a little moment to gather this. So those 4 positions are the Senior Manager of Foster Care Support, who will take the lead in building the frameworks for ongoing school and district level supports. We have the Foster Care and STH Interagency Coordinator, which will support our collaboration across various agencies as well as nonprofit partners. We have the Foster Care and STH Training and Policy Associate. And so what we recognize is having a better understanding and appreciation of both federal, local, and state law, as well as being able to build capacity for our schools and school teams is going to be critically important. And finally, we will have the data manager for the State Central Registry and Foster Care and its STH data management.
Okay, wonderful. What's the timeline for these positions? Now that you have them out there, what's the timeline? And what is the timeline for hiring for each of these positions?
Well, each of these positions are posted. And so our typical process gives us, we'll post them for several weeks that will allow people the opportunity to apply and interview and go through a hiring process. But our goal is to really expedite the process. And so not to delay. And so as we are able to find qualified candidates who really are able to jump in to really get this work started.
And I noticed you stated some of the positions, what they'll be doing. So what are the priorities once this team is put together? What are the priorities? What are the first things this DOE is going to start working on?
So in this first year, some of the key priorities are really looking at DOE policy and refining and offering policy changes and guidance, really advancing school-based professional development, and building school capacities to understand and appreciate what are the best ways and strategies to engage with young people here.
Students in foster care, I noticed you mentioned a lot about mental health. Will you also be providing professional development for these mental health students, support the mental health people you plan to hire? Are you going to provide professional development for them to meet the needs of the students in foster care?
Thank you for the question. I think we have started to provide a level of professional, we've provided school level mental health supports. And so we'll continue to provide those and amplify those. I'm going to call on my colleague Flavia to speak a little bit more around some of the mental health supports that are being provided, and she can expand on that. Can we please unmute Flavia, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thank you, Chair Joseph, for lifting the questions around mental health supports. What I will add is that thanks to the support of the council, and the fact that we were able to hire many more social workers this school year. We know that every school now either has access to a full-time social worker, a school guidance counselor, or a mental health clinic. However, as you're pointing out, for us it's critical to ensure that in every school that we have students with foster care, which are sprinkled across. So you might have schools that have 1 or 2 children versus schools that have 10 or 20, which I think is the highest. That the adults, both in the classroom, teachers, and that the school counselors and the social workers are familiar with the needs of these students. We work to ensure that the designated liaison identify these students as immediately once they join their school, which is something that Dr. Johnson pointed out, and that depending on their needs, if there is a desire or a need for additional mental health, that these students are either referred to the school-based social worker or mental health provided, or that they're referred to our colleagues for the foster care agencies to also help with that support. One of the things that I can say that we are pleased with some of the efforts that we have made, including ensuring that over 75,000 educators in our system were trained in trauma-informed practices, and continue to lead so that every student is welcome in a safe and supportive environment. We also have been partnering with the Healing Center Working Group and adopting some of the recommendations to ensure that we're also working with parents and other stakeholders so that students are cared for, and that we account, as you mentioned, not just for the trauma that students experience as a result of COVID, but the reality is just the exposure that many of us now have to even more of the challenges that students are facing. So, that's a lot of what we're doing, but also really looking forward with the creation of this office and this team to ensure that we're doubling down on the targeted supports and intervention that we're doing on a school-by-school basis and on an individual student basis for this population.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm from talking to foster care agency advocates. They report that schools sometimes are unaware of the rights of most parents to participate in school meetings, have access to school records when their children are in foster care, and sometimes they're unaware of rights of students in foster care. So there's never been furthermore, when questions are arising regarding students in foster care, the parents, the school, the families, and the foster care agencies don't have a point person to address this situation. Can you please tell us your plan for how the new DOE foster care team will address these concerns?
So thank you for the question. I think we will continue to have the designated liaisons, but with regard to the deepened support that would be provided by the Office of Foster Care, I'm going to ask my colleague Mike Hickey to speak a little bit more around the point person and interaction and the connection there. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Johnson. Thanks, Chair Joseph, and everyone for joining us for the conversation today. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to share our thinking with you. First off, let me talk just a little bit about the existing supports for students in foster care in schools. One of our top priorities is to make sure that we're meeting our young people where they are with necessary supports. And so every school has a designated liaison who ensures the students in foster care in that location have proper support in the school community. As Dr. Johnson mentioned in her testimony, most schools have just a handful of students in foster care enrolled in that location. The designated liaisons are historically been trained by the Office of Safety and Youth Development, and we look forward to working with that office as we build the foster care team to develop that training and to make sure it's landing well with all of our liaisons and additional school-facing personnel. Schools receive a monthly list of their students in foster care through a data sharing agreement between the Department of Education and ACS, and schools closely monitor attendance of students in foster care in grades K through 8 and raise concerns with the foster care agency if the student absences so that they can be immediately investigated. This is called the Tiered Response Protocol. It's an established agreement between ACS and DOE, and students in foster care technically fall under Tier 3 of this protocol. I'm happy to talk more about the details of that if it's helpful. So As Dr. Johnson said, these liaisons will remain in place. We'll continue supporting them. We hope to find ways to deepen their awareness, understanding, and ability to be effective partners for these students. But with the creation of this new team, we really do have an opportunity to bring other resources to bear in a more systemic way. And some of the objectives that we're talking about for the first year include really drilling down on some of the changes we'd like to see put in place regarding student transportation, considering changes to chancellor's regulations, or perhaps the creation of a new chancellor's regulation specific to students in foster care, making updates to the annual tools that schools use to communicate about their school planning, including the consolidated plan, which names these liaisons, and then improving access to student data by foster care agencies, parents, and guardians. In addition, we're hoping to really expand what we're offering in terms of our training and professional development so that, parental and foster care provider rights and responsibilities are much better understood by schools and school and district partners, that schools have guidance regarding obtaining school credit for mid-year transfers, on developing self-paced learning materials for school personnel so that they can dip into and out of this information as their schedule allows, and engaging school district leadership to create dedicated professional development sessions at the district level. All of this needs to be embedded in our work of deepening partnerships with ACS, with foster care provider agencies, and really improving connections between schools and foster care providers and our agency stakeholders. So we think we have a lot of potential here to build on this work. And we've already had a number of conversations, and we feel very grounded in the partnerships that's going to be necessary to take this work forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Some of my advocates have always said that the designated position, the liaison, sometimes the person at the DOE doesn't even realize their responsibility. And as of last night, we noticed that of the positions for foster care, we only still have 2 positions that are posted. Can you clear that up for me, please?
So I will confer with the team, but as of yesterday evening, all 4 positions were posted. As of last week, there were emerging postings, so it might be possible that they pulled the information last week.
All right, we'll verify that, and if you could send that over to us, that would be very, very helpful.
Absolutely.
I'm going to touch on something that's been, it affected me, but thank God we were able to overcome that, but not many families in New York City was able to do that. Transportation, bus servicing. We know that the federal and state law require that the Department of Education provide transportation between children's foster care placement and the school the students can stay in their original schools. DOE does not guarantee bus service. It's not a guaranteed service or comparable transportation to students. Many of the students in foster care we know has IEPs as well. So currently, how many K-12 students in foster care are receiving bus services from the DOE to get to school?
Thank you, Chair. Transportation is an important issue that the administration is committed to addressing. As such, my colleague Glenn Risbrook from the Office of Pupil Transportation, I'd like to defer to him to provide a more detailed response. So please unmute, Glenn.
Yes, thank you, Chair Joseph, for the question. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Using the snapshot file that we received recently from ACS, we have 972 students that receive curb to school busing that are in foster care, and 259 that receive stop to school busing, which is generally our general education students.
How many of those students are IEP mandated? Do you know?
Yes, for the curb to school, 791 of those are IEP mandated and receive busing not through the exception process.
Okay. Of those students who receive busing service from the DOE, do you know how many lives outside of care have been placed in care outside of New York City?
That exact number I do not have. I'll bring that back to the committee, but thank you again for the question. But for the students who reside outside of New York City and are placed there through foster care placement, we provide public transportation to those students, whether it's Long Island Railroad, Metro North, New Jersey Transit, whatever it is the predominant transportation service for the district that they reside in. For our students who have IEPs, we work with the residing district to provide the appropriate transportation at a shared cost, or at times the cost is fully burdened by the Department of Education.
Thank you. Of those many requests for busing, has the OPT received under the foster care exceptions this year? Of the requests, how many students received busing?
During 2021-22, we received about 762 students that applied for the exception.
Okay, and what's the average length of time being this year between receiving an exception request and beginning bus service for the students in foster care? What does that mean?
Thank you again for the question, Chair. We expedite processing of exception requests for students in foster care because we understand the importance of school stability and the role transportation plays in for a student remaining in the school of origin. Transportation cannot be the impediment of students getting an education. That said, given that we receive multiple requests for students, particularly those receiving multiple successive placements when they move from address to address, it's hard to drill down on the length of time between requests in the first day of writing. I will take that back to the team. We'll do a further analysis, but it varies so widely that it was hard to drill down on an average time.
Because sometimes because of transportation, students have to withdraw the transportation because they're placed in other homes while waiting for bus service. Do you have any data on that type of information?
Well, we have provided transportation to just about all students or families that requested transportation through the exception process. There are times that there is a time lag when we have to investigate what bus routes are available. The challenges there are usually students that are in foster care sometimes have to traverse long distances to their school, which limits the amount of available bus routes. But we have either provided transportation for or in the process of providing transportation for all students that requested bus services. So we do, and it is our goal that transportation will not be the reason why a student has to change their school of origin.
Yeah, because that's in foster care, that creates the stability, knowing their peers and remaining in their schools. That becomes very important in their social emotional stability while staying in place, while they go through this traumatic, being placed in foster care, traumatic. I have my two boys, and it was traumatic. And so we know what the outcomes are if we provide the right services at the right time for them. At last month's budget hearing, the DOE stated that they were looking for a model of transportation in foster care that didn't have a cost estimate for use at the time. Do you think you have a cost estimate today for guaranteeing bus services or comparable transportation for students in foster care who need to stay in their schools?
Thank you again for the question, Chair. No, we do not have a cost estimate because in my view, we are actually providing transportation to all students that requested in foster care. It's actually what we do day to day. So we haven't drilled down a cost estimate. I will take that back to my team though and see if we can drill down on something specific and bring it back to the council. But at this point, there are very few students that are waiting for transportation. And once we drill down on that cost estimate, something more specific, I'll bring it to the council.
Okay. All right. Yes, thank you so much for that. So here, if you're providing bus service for all the students in care who request it, can you agree to guarantee bus service for students in care? That's something we looking for a guarantee because it's a make and break for a child being placed in a new home, being placed with new families. Not all of them get a kingship. If they're lucky enough, they can get a kingship, but not all children get that, unfortunately. So is there a guarantee? That has to be a guarantee that keep going to school and being steady is possible, because it's an inconvenience for the family that takes them in with an open heart, that want to make sure that child has a stable home until they get through the trauma that they're experiencing at the time they're placed in the home.
Thank you again for the question, Chair. We currently guarantee busing or a comparable service for our students in grades K through 6 that live within New York City and go to school within the 5 boroughs. Again, as I mentioned, for the students that have been placed outside of New York City, we do provide public transportation in the methods that I previously mentioned. And for our students that have IEP mandating transportation, we do work again with those placement districts. But it is a resource issue at the end of the day. I wanted to pretty much, I know we speak about a lot of times about some of the failures that we have. I kind of want to point out what we're doing within the Office of Pupil Transportation to address these issues. And it's sort of a 3-track approach that we're having. The first track is what we're developing now is having the leaders within the Office of Pupil Transportation, and not just myself, appear at hearings this way or with the public advocacies or with families, but actually the leaders of the different units within the Office of Pupil Transportation attend these meetings and enter these dialogues as well. What that does is it brings the accountability, not just to me and to the special advisor, to the chancellor and the chancellor himself, but to the public. And when they do that, I think they feel in a real way how this is impacting their decisions, and what they do every day impacts the families and the children of the city of New York. So that's one track. The second track we're doing is we have invested millions of dollars in improving the logistical software that we use, in the communication software. And we'll be rolling out that initiative here, in my expectation should be in the fall. What this does, it has provided caregivers the ability to virtually be on the bus with their children. So we know when little Johnny has gotten on the bus, we know how long it's taken him to get to school. We know when he's getting off the bus, and the schools have access to that same data. And then we get feedback from families to help improve the services. So that's another track that we're going down. And what it also does, it pulls back that veil that the bus companies have between themselves and the DOE. We're able to actually drill down on that resource issue I just spoke about. We're able to understand in real terms where they are allocating their resources, where we can reappropriate them, so we can take a full advantage of the resources that we do have to provide additional support to populations of students that need additional support. So that's the second track. The third track is pretty much dealing with these god-awful contracts we have with the bus companies. We're right now, what we're doing is we're going through the particular contracts we have now, and we're developing a plan to how we're going to negotiate contracts going forward. What I will say is that to the council and everyone here, you have an advocate in me to ensure that the goals of these contracts going forward are more in line with the needs of the families of the city of New York and not skewed to the needs of the bus companies. So that's the third approach. So, and then we're working on different ways to try to improve the staffing levels with the bus companies. So to just drill back on the initial question, it is a resource. We're working on those issues so we can further provide additional support to the families of the city of New York.
Thank you so much, Mr. Risbrook. Malcolm, I will acknowledge my council members that have joined: Councilmember Velas, Councilmember Denowitz, Councilmember Brewer, Councilmember Hanks, Councilmember Lewis, Councilmember Stevens, Carmen De La Rosa, Councilmember De La Rosa, Councilmember Sanchez, Councilmember Menon, Councilmember Stevens, Councilmember Lewis, Councilmember Krishna, Councilmember Gutierrez, Councilmember Brewer, Councilmember Narcisse. I'm gonna open it up. If I missed anyone in my second round, I'll come back and acknowledge you. Malcolm, I can open up the floor to my colleagues for some questioning, and I'll come back.
Yep, and the other council members that have joined us were Ressler and Feliz. I want to remind council members, use the raise hand function for questions. You will receive 5 minutes. There is no second round. So we're going to start with Councilmember Dinowitz, and then we'll turn to council members Shulman, Lewis, and Aviles, but we'll first start with Councilmember Dinowitz.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair, for having this really important hearing, and of course to the foster parents out there, and especially to our foster kids in foster care who are often facing immense challenges and trauma, and of course in school are expected to do the same schoolwork as their peers who are often in more stable environments. I have two questions. One is, you spoke about the positions that are posted. It's of course vital that we fill these positions to ensure our foster children get the kids in foster care get the support that they need and deserve. Where are these positions posted?
I will check with my, I'll check with my team to confirm. They're posted on the DOE website.
Cool. I'd love for you to share that link with me. I looked at the schools.nyc.gov career job opportunities website, and I looked at the nychb.teachersupportnetwork.com. I was unable to find these positions anywhere on either of these websites. I see a number of positions that are posted for kids in the shelter system, for other guidance positions per session, opportunities, things dealing with Regents exams. I couldn't find anything about the 4 positions that you listed: the Senior Manager of Foster Care Support, Foster Care, SCH Training and Policy, Data Manager. I couldn't find any of those. So if you would please share the link with me, because if it's difficult to find, it's going to be difficult to fill those positions.
Understood.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just going to say they are currently internal positions. So they're internal candidates. So I can share the link, but it's currently an internal posting.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, we know our kids in foster care have more needs typically than students not in foster care. Is there a systemic way that teachers know that our children in foster care would need more of that emotional support, more mental health care, similar to the way if a student has an IEP, it's listed on the attendance record, it's listed in the student's record that they have an IEP, and the teacher may have a little more information or know to look into it a little more, look on CSIS. If a student's an English language learner, is the same sort of system set up for kids in foster care?
Thank you, Council Member, for the question. So within 1 day of a student being placed in foster care, the designated liaison is notified, and the foster care agency submits a letter to the designated liaison, and it's indicated in the ATS profile, which is the data system that the DOE uses. So schools do have data about which students are in care.
Is that data transmitted directly to the teacher, or is it possible that data stays with the principal or with whoever does ATS?
I think that's a great question. I would say, as a former principal, one of the things I would say is, when we think about the supports that we provide for all of our students, I think it's critically important that we ensure that all students get universal supports, that we enable teachers to be able to exercise a level of judgment and assessment around what are the profiles and what are the protocols. We want to ensure that our young people who are in care have a level of privacy, and that we don't violate their privacy. And so what we want is to do the screeners for, are there any indicators of external indicators of trauma? Are they aligned with the social workers and the social work support to ensure that if these young people are experiencing any additional challenges that they have that? And then we also work in partnership with ACS and our provider agencies to really support young people, particularly those who might demonstrate any level of distress. But outside of that, we really want to preserve young people's privacy. And if there is a special circumstance as needed, we would disclose that.
Okay, so I just want to summarize that. No, right? Which is, and I would just ask what the line is between privacy, because that line doesn't exist for students who have an IEP or English language learners or all sorts of other things. So, if we need to pay special attention and special care to students who have needs, I'm not sure what the line is there for students in foster care who are going to need more support emotionally and academically. So I'll leave it there. And just so the answers to my questions are the positions are not publicly posted, and that there is no way for a teacher to know beyond maybe the principal sharing with them. There's no way for a teacher to know automatically if that student's in foster care and would then need more additional attention.
So what I would say in response to that, thank you again, Council Member, for the question, is that it is important for us to ensure that if a young person is exhibiting or demonstrating any level of trauma or distress, that we provide levels of support for them. Every young person, like every individual, is going to handle a change in location differently. And while it's a level of trauma, it's a level of change. And typically there are circumstances that lead to it. What we don't want to do is to stigmatize young people by giving them a label if they've figured out ways to be resilient and to manage whatever the current situations and circumstances are. What we do offer is opportunities for our social work team, our school counselors to provide additional support. So in terms of whether or not the classroom teacher would need that information, unless a young person is really exhibiting some level of distress, I think for the classroom teacher, I think what we want is for them to be caring and trusting adults for young people. We want them to connect with the young people. We want them to know our young people. And I think as we manage kind of those external circumstances, sometimes we place things on young people that if they've started to figure out how to manage it, how to cope with it, we don't necessarily want to create some additional stigma.
Okay, I just having been a teacher, I always found it better to address something before it becomes a problem and not wait till a child is exhibiting externally the trauma and wait for it to be addressed after the fact. So I guess we have different perspectives on how best to support children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll turn to Councilmember Schulman.
Time starts now.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Chair Joseph for holding this important hearing. In my previous position in the City Council before I became a council member, I worked very closely with foster youth. So this is something that's near and dear to me. So Dr. Johnson, I wanted to ask, how is ACS coordinating services with the DOE LGBTQ liaison, Kalima McKenzie Sims?
Thank you for that question. I would defer to my colleague, Julie Farber from ACS, to share a little bit more expertise around how ACS and collaborates with our schools and school structures and systems.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, and thank you for all the questions. I do want to just thank the chair and everyone for holding this hearing, and it's wonderful, Chair Joseph, to have a foster and adoptive parent on the council, which is just fantastic. And Chair Joseph, I'm actually one of your constituents, and you knocked on my door when you were campaigning. So congratulations. And so we are obviously very committed to supporting young people in foster care in their educational achievement. We're really excited to work with DOE on the new office. And obviously we've been working closely with DOE. As I think Councilmember Dinowitz said, school is a critically important part of any child's life, and particularly the case for young children in foster care. I will also just say that unfortunately, many children arrive in foster care already behind the curve academically, for various reasons. And so our efforts here collectively are critically important to get children back where they should be, and so that they don't fall further behind. I do also just want to mention, just in terms of the prior conversation, teachers, I think, would typically know that children are in foster care, in part because it is part of the role of the foster care agency working with the child to connect with the teacher, see how the child is doing, and so forth. And so it is definitely very important for the foster care agency and the teacher and other school supports to be connected so that we can properly wrap around the child. In terms of LGBTQ children, and thank you very much, Council Member, for the question. ACS is implementing a very aggressive action plan pertaining to LGBTQ children in foster care. There is a large number of children who identify as LGBTQ, and we conduct extensive training of the staff at the foster care agencies, as well as foster parents. We, of course, require that all of our foster parents are affirming. We're implementing a range of new initiatives that relate to training and updating our policies and providing additional supports for young people, working with the Ackerman Institute and other entities. We really look forward to working with the new administration and the DOE's office to join efforts around LGBTQ youth, which really comprise a relatively significant proportion of young people in foster care. So I really thank you for that question.
No, thank you. And I'd love to see that information too, as one of the open lesbians on the city council. It's something that's very important to me. Are there any specific services DOE provides ACS involved children, considering that, as you said, a lot of teens in foster care are LGBTQ?
I'll defer that to my colleagues at the DOE.
Thank you for the question. The team that supports our LGBTQ population really works closely. They are also part of this office, the larger offices of the four within the portfolio. So they fall within the Office of Safety and Youth Development. And what we find is that it's critically important to provide supports for all young people. And our teams work across offices to really think about how to target and provide additional supports. So when we think about how we will align the members, some of the capacity building work, how we look at the data, how we look at the different supports that we will provide for young people. That is definitely an area that we are committed to working on, and very happy to partnering with you and the council on the best ways to really support and advance this work.
Since my time is up, I have other questions, but I'd like to meet with you directly and we can talk about those.
Absolutely. I'll connect with the team, have the team connect with you. Councilmember Shulman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Shulman, I'll send you Dr. Johnson's contact info right now. Next, we'll turn to Councilmember Lewis.
Thank you.
Time starts now.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair Joseph, for holding this very important hearing. Thank you to all those that are testifying today and answering questions. My questions are relating to graduation rates and suspension rates among students in the DOE. So the first question is in regarding to foster children and their level of completion of grades during the COVID-19 pandemic. I wanted to know if there was any data that DOE could provide to us today. And I asked this question because according to a 2018 report of the city's interagency foster care task force, 22% of foster care students repeated grades. So I wanted to know if we had updated statistics on that, and if we had in particularly updated statistics during this pandemic that you all could share. And my second question after that is in regards to graduation rates for foster care students in NYC. We know that there's been a staggering percentage, about 48%. That's well below the citywide percentage of 81% of students that are not in foster care. So I wanted to know what steps that, DOE was taking to raise graduation percentages for foster care students.
Thank you for the question, Council Member. So what we recognize, again, is our young people who are in care are typically those who have experienced traumatic incidents and challenges, and in many instances, gaps in instruction. And so figuring out the ways to support them. Many of those young people end up overaged and undercredited, and they end up at some of our transfer schools. So we provide targeted support for young people at our transfer schools. I want to defer to my colleague, Flavia Perdomo, who is also who is a former transfer school principal, who can speak specifically to some of the experience and some of the supports that are provided for young people as part of the transfer school experience, where we find many of our students in foster care. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thank you, Council Member. Just For the record, I was not a former transfer school principal, but
Oh,
I was
sorry.
a former, no, absolutely. I was a former transfer school deputy soup, but I am a former New York City principal from District 7. So thank you for listing that question, which I know is important to you and it's important to me both as a former high school teacher and high school principal in terms of like the work that we're doing to bolster the academic supports for students in foster care. I first want to emphasize that through the pandemic and beyond the pandemic, we have provided significant amount of funding to school to ensure that they're bolstering their academic strategy and really looking at individualized needs of students. And as Dr. Johnson mentioned, roughly about 30% of the students who are in foster care are high school students and predominantly working in attending transfer schools. And what I can say about transfer school from the moment that a student joins is that there's enrolling admission process, which support these students at different times of the year. And because of the trimester model that they have for credits to be able to jump in, get acclimated, and then again, given an opportunities to join the courses that they need to meet graduation requirements. In addition to that, students who attend transfer schools are partnered with an advocate counselor who's oftentimes a member of a CVO learning partner organization that works with the transfer school to ensure that when you're working with that student that you're first are working on re-engaging, you are working on the social emotional needs of that student and then focus on the academics, right? Like really thinking that, like, how do you take care first of the self so that students can achieve at the highest possible level. As you mentioned, there's definitely work to do in that area in terms of looking at improving academic outcomes, particularly around high school graduation. So I am personally looking forward to partner to work and support the team under the guidance and leadership of Dr. Johnson that is going to be working on building the Office of Foster Care to ensure that we are really accounting for every child and for each of their needs. One thing that I can say that since the pandemic, we have seen a slight reduction on the number of overage, undercredited students that are in foster care. I think this is like data worthwhile monitoring and continuing to look through, because what happened with the pandemic is that under the guidance of the regents at the state level, we were able to do things like waiver to regents and really leverage multiple opportunities to get our students to the finish line. So I welcome an opportunity, as I know Dr. Johnson does, to partner with council, with you, and to continue to work on building our supports and infrastructure that will lead to better outcomes for the student population. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that. And I'm happy to hear that you all are working on that. If it's okay for me to ask one more question, because I know that was a long response, but I did have one last question regarding the superintendent's suspension for students in foster care. Falvi, I don't know if that's the same response because we're still in the middle of a pandemic, but if you could respond to that. And thank you for answering the question. And thank you, Chair.
Absolutely happy to respond to that, and equally here and beyond, right? This hearing is a moment in time, and I hope that this work is long-term and systemic for us to continue to build the outcomes that we want. What I can say is that 6.4% of the unique students who have been suspended with a principal suspension are students in foster care, compared to 93.6%, which are non-students in foster care, and that 8.5% of students that received a superintendent suspension are students in foster care, compared to 91.5%. I think as an administration, this chancellor has been very clear about ensuring that we're continue to build supportive systems, and that we're keeping, especially students who have been impacted, gone through trauma, have been moved from their home stable. And for many of the young people, and I can talk from my experience being a school leader, sometimes the schoolhouse is one of the most stable places that they have and where they have some of the more consistent relationships. So I know that we continue to build on that so that we're actually are focused on practices that are non-punitive and keep our kids and keep our young people in the schoolhouse, where sometimes it's like the most stable place that they have at this moment in time. But happy to answer any additional questions beyond this hearing.
Thank you.
And
And next, oh, sorry, go ahead, Deputy Commissioner.
Thank you. And I just wanted to add, Councilmember Lewis, thank you so much for your question about high school graduation rates. It's an area that we're very concerned about, and wanted to mention that in addition to all of the work that the DOE is already doing and planning, and Dr. Johnson mentioned this in her testimony, over the last couple of years, ACS has implemented a major initiative called Fair Futures, which is providing tutoring, coaching, educational advocacy, vocational training, internships, career readiness, intensive supports for young people in foster care ages 11 to 21. And we are starting to see some positive impact of those efforts. And all of that, that's about a $20 million program right now. And so that is an important piece of specialized attention to children in foster care who've experienced trauma that overlays on top of everything that the DOE is doing and planning, as I mentioned.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we will turn to Councilmember Aviles.
Time starts now.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Chair Joseph, for this hearing and this very important topic. I actually wanted to make a quick statement and then kind of follow along the lines of some questioning already. In terms of transfer students, transfer schools, what we have been finding is that because of the rolling admissions element of transfer schools, what we see is that the money is not following the students, and transfer schools, unfortunately, are also finding themselves in these constant budget deficits because students are transferred in after the enrollment deadlines, right? And so the school, we have a school in our district that is very much constantly experiencing this budget problem, right? So this is something we absolutely have to address. It is unfair to the schools who are trying to, provide as much resource as possible to our most vulnerable students, and yet we have this funding mechanism that simply is just not doing its work. So I would love to hear some feedback around how we can address this chronic issue, particularly related to transfer schools. And also would like to hear a little bit more about in terms of the suspension. I'm glad to hear that it is a smaller portion of the largest, the overall group. I'd like to know, of the 7,000 children, what is the proportion or the number of children that are experiencing principal suspension, to understand within the confines of the population itself what that percentage looks like. I'll stop there.
Thank you for the question, Council Member. We will, so with regard to transfer schools, I think the funding, to your point, funding is allocated and defined by that October 31st deadline to determine population. But there are also enrollment adjustments and funding adjustments that happen mid-year, around February. But I do think that how we understand and appreciate the funding formulas and funding sources for transfer schools is an additional area for additional conversation and discussion. And so I definitely would look forward to partnering with you and other members of the council to have a better understanding of it, as well as to think about ways where we might be able to think about it more creatively. With regard to the question of the number of young people, the percentage of the 7,000 young people, just give me one moment. We are looking to see if we have the data available now or if we will, we may need to get back to you on that particular data point. Not because it's not available, but I just don't have it at my fingertips right now.
Right. Well, I definitely love to see that data and, you know, explore, hear a little bit more. I definitely started to discuss the Healthy Schools initiative. I know I'm calling it the wrong thing. It was just mentioned, but certainly would love to drill down a little bit more to understand what are the restorative justice practices. What does it truly look like on the ground? Because often what we hear on the ground from our communities and students is very different than the picture that is being painted, or at least the intention, right? The intention that is being put out in terms of these programs. And there is such a discrepancy between the lived realities of staff members of CBOs who are taking kids to school because they can't figure out the busing, or suspensions, or any of these elements compared to kind of the vision. We need to figure out how to bring these two things together. So I'd love to talk more about ensuring that suspensions, that we are finding solutions and we are stopping suspensions, and we are doing the best we can by our students in care and all vulnerable students across New York City.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you.
And next we will call on Councilmember Sanchez.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I have to be off camera for this question, but thank you so much to the chair for first just sharing your story and holding this hearing. It's so important. So completely want to agree with Councilmember Aviles on suspension rates. I wanted to ask about grade retention, and so according to the 2018 report on the city's interagency foster care task force, 22% of students in foster care had a repeated grade compared to 6% of students citywide, right? Huge disparity there. So do you have updated statistics for this disparity from the 2018 number? How many and what percentage of students in foster care were held over last year? How does that compare to students not in foster care? And then how many and what percentage of students in foster care are promotion in doubt already this school year? How does that compare to students not in foster care? And importantly, you know, what is the administration, what is the DOE doing about it?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. What I will say is, I think when we look at the last 2 years and what has happened during the last 25 months or so, a lot has changed. We were able to think creatively and offer young people some different options and outcomes. We were able to engage in Regents waivers. We were able to engage in a different way and a different approach to allow young people multiple opportunities to really demonstrate success. And so as such, we started to see some shifts in terms of retention and retention rates, as well as some increases in promotion and reductions in promotion and doubt. What we do recognize is that we still have not yet met the number or hit the threshold that we want. What we want is for 100% of our young people to demonstrate success. And what we want is for 100% of our young people to have a range of post-secondary options available to them. When we think about the ways that we would categorize or organize this data, with regard to middle school and high school performance, we would look at those young people who are overage and undercredited. And so if we were to look at the numbers from 2020 to 2021, for the number of young people who were of the 7,416, about 6.5% were overage and undercredited, which was slightly less than the citywide rate by about 2%. Well, sorry, the citywide average was about 2%, excuse me. So they were slightly in excess. And in the pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, what we saw is that we had about 18%. So we did see a bit of a reduction in that transition from the pandemic years to the 2021 year. And then we would still be in the midst of this year, so we wouldn't have any current data for this year. Okay. Thank you.
Wait, did you have anything else, Councilmember Sanchez?
I'm
There we
good.
go.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll turn to Councilmember Ressler.
Time starts now.
Firstly, I just would like to thank our chair, Rita Joseph, for her leadership here, for her sharing her personal experience and shining a light on this issue. I think that we would all agree that the 7,000 young people who are in our foster care system are in our public schools are in need of additional resources, attention, and advocacy. And while I welcome the DOE finally having a dedicated team of professionals who are focused on supporting our young people in foster care and their families, I'm a little concerned that we still haven't staffed up, and just wanted to try to get some additional clarity on where we are in the hiring process. I think if I heard correctly, Dr. Johnson, you indicated these were not public postings. They are not positions that members of the public are able to apply for. They're only internal postings. Is that right?
So they are public postings, but they are postings for internal DOE candidates. Yes, so it is an internal DOE
Only
candidate.
for DOE personnel. And that's
Yes.
because of a hiring freeze that has inhibited your ability to recruit outside talent?
No,
and not increase total headcount?
Oh, sorry. No, there is no hiring freeze. And so what I would say is what we want to do is we want to tap on the expertise and familiarity of those within the population. We also should say, when we say internal, it also extends not just to the DOE, but anyone who falls within the civil service title. So it would broaden across multiple city agencies. But I just think in terms of timeline and expedition, we just found that the internal posting was, it just was easier to post and be able to identify candidates who have both experience with young people in the educational space, as well as young people who are experiencing, who have experience, who are in foster care.
So when did these internal postings go up?
So they went up, the final posting went up yesterday.
Yesterday. Okay.
Mhm.
And you're not making these positions open to the public to apply because you think it'll be faster to move internal candidates into these roles? Otherwise, the only thing that I could understand is that you don't have the ability to add additional headcount, so you can take staff from other positions for these roles. But if that isn't the rationale, and as you're saying, it's for expediency to move people into these positions, then is that right? I mean, I'm just trying to understand why you wouldn't be offering the opportunity to broadly post these positions and move people into the roles.
So what I will say is that these decisions were made, we make these decisions in collaboration with our team members. And so in looking at the experience of the Office of Students in Temporary Housing, we took some recommendations. So I'm going to defer to my colleague, Mike, to help to clarify if there are any areas that were unclear about what I've just said. So please unmute Mike.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam Ressler, for the questions. Yeah, there are some concerns or things that we're navigating around civil service requirements that do require the DOE to post these internally here first. We can certainly share the links if you all have colleagues in the Department of Education you think would be eligible candidates and are permanently placed in the titles required for these positions. We would very much like to hear from them. If folks have further questions about how civil service operates here in the Department of Education, we're certainly available to respond to those questions as well. But it's one of the quirks of working within the civil service structure that we have to post these positions internally here at the Department of Education first.
Okay. And do you have a timeline for when you expect to be fully staffed up?
It does depend a little bit on that process. So for some of the titles, we are following the hiring pool protocols that are put together by Division of Human Capital and DCAS. And so we're somewhat subject to their timelines. That being said, I think we're confident that we will have these positions brought in over this summer.
Okay, I appreciate it, Mike and Dr. Johnson. I think that it's clear with Chair Joseph's leadership here that we're gonna, as a council, really focus on the DOE doing everything they possibly can to support this population. And so we want to see that team staffed up. We want to see that team supported. And we want to do everything we can to help our young people in foster care succeed. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the work that you're all doing.
Oh, I'm muted. Thank you, Councilmember Ressler. Next, we'll turn to Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you very much, Chair Joseph. So I have a couple of questions and I've been in and out, so I hope I'm not repeating. Number one, as the parent of many foster care and adopted children, what I dealt with constantly in a very positive way was the students in temporary housing. So I guess my question is, when was that department, and they were excellent, I have to tell you, fully funded? And when, because my understanding and my experience is that particular group of individuals took kids on college tours and then did all the support that so many young people need. So I'm just wondering, how did that work during this span when nobody has been home to make sure that this same group of students had support? That's my first question. And my second one is, how does Fair Futures, which we love, we're delighted that the mayor has supported them, how do they fit in to the work that you're going to be doing, particularly if there's nobody home at DOE? How does that all fit together?
Thank you, Council Member. So I actually will, since we do have the Director for the Office of Students in Temporary Housing on the call, I actually would defer to him to really speak a little bit more to this challenge, but we do recognize the additional supports and the opportunity to partner with both ACS as well as our agency, our nonprofit partners. So Mike, will you respond?
Yep, we'll go ahead and unmute him. One moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Brewer, for the question. I'm glad to know that you hold the work of the Students in Temporary Housing team in such high regard. That team has been around for a long time and is still extant. I'm the current executive director of that work and have been for the past 3 years. I think one of the structural challenges that we've faced is that students in foster care were actually moved from the federal definition of McKinney-Vento in 2016. As a result of that change, they were no longer covered under McKinney-Vento, and that placed limitations on the kinds of resources we could leverage to support that portion of the population. We've continued to offer all the same supports that I think you remember well to students that are otherwise qualified as being housing unstable or affected by homelessness. As a matter of fact, I think that work has dramatically expanded since your interactions with it in the 1980s. There are currently 324 STH positions citywide that include social workers, community coordinators, and DOE personnel who operate in shelters. So it's very extensive work. And one of the benefits of bringing the foster care team into the Office of Students in Temporary Housing, there's two important things. One is many of our legacy team members predate that 2016 time period. So they actually have direct experience working with students in foster care and still carry that expertise. And they'll be partnered now with the new members that we're bringing into this work. And second is we'll be able to leverage all of the things that we know about supporting students in temporary housing. And there are strong parallels in the supports needed for students in foster care we really think we can bring to bear. So we think the alignment is very compelling and powerful. And we think that will help us kind of leapfrog to some of the supports that you mentioned that result in direct services that students in foster care really feel in a daily way that improves their lives and experiences.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the foster care 11 positions that are being filled according to civil service, and I knew that was going to be the challenge. So that will be within STH. Is that what you're saying? But you also have some vacancies in your Bronx office right now.
Yes, that is
I can
correct.
tell you exactly who's vacant and what the positions are. So I'm trying to be nice, but how are you going to fill those? What's going on? And do you have other vacancies? I have foster care and STH kids. They know exactly what's going on.
So you're correct on both points. On the first point, we will be integrating the students in foster care work with the students in temporary housing team work. All of that
Okay.
work will roll up to my directors and to me. We also do have other STEACH team vacancies that we've been working to fill for some time. Those are, again, there are challenges related to civil service that have limited our ability to move quickly to fill those positions.
Okay, but I'm just saying that we should be helping with civil service. I know it's a challenge. I know exactly what the issues are, but you really do need to fill these positions. So if we can help, let us know. I think maybe we're more apt to be able to do it than you are. How does Fair Futures fit into all this?
I think that's a great question. And our colleagues, Julie Farber from ACS, can speak more. Can speak more about Fair Futures.
Yes, I'm happy to take that. Hi, Councilmember Brewer, nice to see you. And I know you have a long history as a foster parent, and so it's wonderful. So thank you
Bureau,
for that.
BCW, that was my agency. Go ahead.
Yes, that's right. Okay, yeah. So thank you so much for that, and really appreciate your incredible commitment to individual children, but also the system. So in terms of Fair Futures, as I mentioned, it has been a truly incredible infusion of resources. It's now gone from 12 million to 20 million, and that funding is supporting intensive tutoring, it's supporting coaches for young people, it's supporting education specialists and career specialists and internships and technical assistance and professional development for staff. And what's really critical is that the coaches are really exclusively dedicated to the young people. So currently, when you have a foster care case planner, they're responsible to the foster parent, they're responsible to the parent, they're having to go to court, they're doing, all of the different pieces that are required on a foster care case. And what's important about the Fair Futures resources is that these are dedicated resources exclusively focused on the young people's educational well-being, employment growth, and so forth. And so part of what happens is there are case coordination meetings that can involve teachers and tutors and the DOE that really bring everyone around the student.
Okay, I just want to make sure there's no. So if I talk to Fair Futures, they're going to say that. Are they going to tell me there's no bureaucratic problems? This is all working out very well.
That's a great question, Council Member. I think that what's fabulous about Fair Futures is, like I said, because you have a coach who is dedicated to the young person, and the coaches are really trained with sort of the by any means necessary approach. And so coaches are on the phone in the middle of the night.
Well,
they
you have
are
to be.
doing whatever needs to be
You
done.
have to be. You have to be. Okay. Well, thank you. I don't want to take any more time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Chair Joseph, I will turn it back to you. There are no further hands. Oh, Chair, you're muted. There we go.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I wanted to get back to something really interesting. I was looking at my data again as an educator, and anyone on here knows that. Data always drive our assessment and our policy making. And I'm noticing that around 50% of our students are in special education currently, and what the percentage of students in foster care in New York have IEPs. Does that include students in charter school, students placed by the DOE in state-approved non-public school, or only students in district schools?
So thank you for the question, Chair. I will, to really talk about the special education population, I'm going to defer to my colleague, John Hammer from the Office of Special Education.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thank you, Chair Joseph, for that question. So during the 2020-2021 school year, a total of 3,306 students in foster care were also students with IEPs. That is roughly 44.6% of all foster care students. And that number of 3,306, that includes students in charter schools and non-public school settings.
Oh, wow. Okay. So how many of the percentage of students with IEPs are placed in self-contained special education classes? And how does that compare to students who are not in foster care?
Chair Joseph, thank you for that question, and we are absolutely committed to continuing to provide the supports and services that our students need across all settings, including our most vulnerable students. As of May 31st of last year, roughly 49.7% of students with IEPs in foster care were recommended to receive instruction in a special class, compared to 30% of students with IEPs not in foster care. Our goal is to center the unique needs of our students with disabilities while ensuring equitable access and inclusion for all students across our state.
Wow, in terms of, the numbers are not good, people. This is not good. So how many of the students are also placed in District 75 schools, if any? Do you have data on that as well?
So as of May 31st of 2021, little over 20% of students with IEPs in foster care were recommended to receive instruction in the District 75 program. That compares to a little under 10% of students with IEPs not in foster care. And so I understand your concern here, Chair Joseph, and we are taking several steps to ensure that our IEP teams and schools are prepared to support students that have entered the foster care system and are vulnerable and at risk of experiencing adverse childhood experiences. So, back in November of 2021, we issued guidance and training on considering trauma and special education evaluations and IEP development. The guidance is aimed at providing a trauma-informed framework of best practices regarding how a student's experience with trauma should be considered during the special education evaluation and IEP development process. Our best practices guide for IEP teams working with families during the transition to kindergarten includes taking into account environmental and other stressors in the initial eligibility determination as well. We've made training opportunities available to support IEP teams in considering the possible impact of trauma on the individual student. This asynchronous training is available to all staff members who are part of the IEP team, including but not limited to special education teachers, general education teachers, related service providers, administrators, school psychologists, and social workers. Additionally, we've conducted annual trainings over the last several years to highlight disproportionality in all forms in special class recommendations. Along with increasing awareness through training on disproportionality, we've conducted trainings on the topic of surrogate parents as a joint initiative with Advocates for Children and Legal Aid. Our last training in June 2021 was attended by over 2,700 staff members. This training has informed attendees on the data as it relates to special class recommendations for students in foster care and supported our IEP teams in knowledge and awareness of this highly impacted subgroup of students. We are planning to continue this commitment to this initiative to ensure students in foster care are provided equal opportunity to be educated in inclusive classrooms. Thanks again for your commitment to this issue, Chair Joseph. I'm happy to
thank you. I'm just wondering, someone has a lot of noise in the background. I'm just wondering, when I'm looking at the data and I'm analyzing it, and as I was reviewing this data, I'm realizing that most of this disproportionate representation of students in foster care that are placed in the most restrictive special education setting. So can someone talk about that for me? I would love to see that, just as the suspension rates, the supports, it's everything geared back to the foster care students. They get the brunt of everything. So can you speak to that restrictive special education? How is that determined? Why are more students in foster care placed in restrictive special education settings?
Yes, I spoke a little bit about the work that we're doing with our IEP teams in training around considering trauma in the evaluation process and in IEP development. I think it's also important to note that we're doing a lot of trainings with our related service providers to ensure that they are really trained to provide trauma-informed care. And this is training that we've provided to all DOE speech, occupational therapists, and physical therapists. Training on creating self and accepting environments and training them to provide environments, ensure that students can feel safe and supported within their therapy sessions. Training on the importance of having a daily routine and predictability. Training around asking the student what their needs are and how they can support, as well as training on self-regulation. We're also training our therapists on the use of self and asking our therapists to be cognizant of their own verbal language, using non-threatening physical stance, and also to be cognizant of their tone and voice. And on all of these issues, we understand that we continue to have work to be done, and really are excited and committed to continuing to partner with Mike and his team as that team grows out, to ensure that the needs of students with IEPs are made clear and integrated in all the trainings that him and his team will be doing through overall DOE efforts to support the student population.
Is the SBST teams at the school-based support team, are they also being trained when these screenings are happening? And how do you determine so many numbers of our Black and Brown, these are Black and Brown students that look like myself that end up in special ed and those restrictive settings, 12-to-1, how does that happen? How do you determine that? That's why I wanted to know, is the school-based support team also part of this conversation when these decisions are being made? And is the foster parent around the table, or how does that happen? Because I'm really, these numbers are bothering me a lot.
I understand and understand that we have work here to do on these data, and our commitment is to continue to provide services in inclusive settings to the greatest extent possible. Absolutely, the SBST team are included in all of these trainings. Really, the guidance around considering trauma in the evaluation processes and in the IEP development is specifically intended for our SBST teams and our CSC IEP teams, and really helping them to consider the impact of trauma across the special education evaluation process, beginning at the social history update and working with families to ensure that they're clear on any impact of trauma they have had that student may be exhibiting in the home, through the initial evaluation, and supports that can be provided throughout this process. So absolutely, our SBST team is being engaged throughout this process.
Are the parents that are attending these meetings, the foster parents, are they also trained on the information? Because sometimes these agencies, are they telling the parents that they're attending an IEP meeting? Are their rights told to them, what they have to do before they decide to sign on? And what's alarming here is the suspension rate for students in foster care is high, absenteeism rate, retention. I mean, these kids already leaving such a traumatic space, and for them, school is supposed to be the safest space for them, and all of these things are being thrown at these kids. I mean, can you speak to that? Are the foster parents informed, or do they also know what they're signing? Who has the right to sign for these things? Can you speak on that for me?
So, John, I'm going to pick up this. Thank you for the question, Chair. I'll say this. We agree and we recognize and we acknowledge that the experience of young people who are in these young people, the students in foster care, that they are not only experiencing trauma, but they also are not necessarily maximizing their academic and social emotional experiences through schools. We do recognize the challenges in many of the areas that you've identified, and it is the intention of this office to really be able to provide the level of guidance and support to really start to provide a real solution and a way forward. I think prior to this, those numbers have existed, and we've seen those numbers, and we recognize and we put smaller interventions in, but those interventions, we still require some more. And I think this is a step towards really making a concerted effort to really push to not only ask the questions, to uplift the data, to implement the strategies, to increase the training, to make certain that people are better aware, better informed around what are the policies and practices and expectations, but also to deepen the relationship so that ultimately we shift and transform the experience for these young people who are in care and who are part of our school system and school structure. We stand committed to this, and we also stand committed to working in partnership with you and other members of the council, other agency partners, our nonprofit partners, to really figure out how do we have some real measurable and impactful change for these young people. I understand that people are concerned and that people are downright outraged around what is happening. And to a certain degree, it is understandable. But the beauty of it is we are here having this conversation and this dialogue to figure out a way to move forward. And we started with some action. And so, we're hoping and relying on you to continue to push us, to ask the questions and to push us to get the results and to see shifts and outcomes, not just for us and not just for the record books or the newspapers, but for the young people and the families whose lives are impacted by this. So I really just wanted to say that before really kind of deferring to your question around kind of what the parent experience is. And because ACS does a lot of the interaction and engagement with the question, I really want, with the parents and families, I really want to defer that question to Julie from ACS to really speak a little bit more closely to it. But thank you so much for the question, Chair. And I definitely appreciate both your passion, commitment to this issue and matter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I appreciate that. And children are not islands, and they're growing up with parents and foster parents, and so it is it's essential to be fully and completely and comprehensively involving parents and foster parents. And parents, when they still have their legal rights to their children, retain full rights in being involved in educational decision making. And so our foster care agency staff are trained around that. I believe the DOE does training for its staff around that. And so it really is a joint effort and joint responsibility of both the DOE and the foster care system to ensure that parents and foster parents are invited to meetings, provided with documents, IEPs, provided with assessments, and for them to receive information, and then certainly with parents to be consulted about decision making. And so the key there is, I think, just constant education and support of both DOE staff and foster care agency staff to ensure that parents and foster parents are, receiving the information they need. And we also have an office at ACS, the Office of Education and Employment Initiatives, where that provides technical assistance to parents, to youth who call, to foster parents, that works with the DOE very closely, that works with the legal advocates who play a very important role in terms of advocating for the needs that children have for their education. But I just want to underscore your point, Chair, that the engagement of parents and foster parents, whoever the caregivers are, kinship, as you mentioned, which is a really important goal for ACS to increase kinship and reduce trauma. So thank you for mentioning that. But it's a critical piece of the work is engaging with parents, in addition to being legally required, but also really, really important.
Dr. Johnson, of course, we will work together to uplift this vulnerable community of students in our schools with all of the partners on the ground. Whether it's advocates, you need advocates to raise and shine the light on this very important topic. We need you to come in and make sure these kids are getting the services that they need. The CBOs to do their part, and all of the foster care agencies as providers to come in. So we each play a role, but together we can uplift this vulnerable population. And that's the reason why we're here today, to make sure that this is highlighted, people are aware of it, and we work to make sure that the needs are being met. But I have a small little question. I know there was a manual that came out in 2011 in collaboration with the DOE, ACS, several different agencies, but we noticed that it's 2022 and that that manual has not been updated since. I'm looking for a timeline to be updated with new information, training the staff on the information in that manual. The manual is the guidelines and procedures for the assignment of surrogate parents.
Well, thank you for the question. I think one of the reasons, one for the office, but also how we thought about prioritizing roles for the office was why we insisted upon ensuring that both that policy and capacity building, that was one of our first actions. This notion of how we have an understanding of what are the rules and expectations and how are they refined and what are the nuances of it? And then how then are we going to get people trained? Because it's great to have a manual, but if people don't have access to it, if people don't have an understanding or appreciation for it, then it too can collect dust. I would also, I will say, I will defer to my colleague, Mike Hickey, to give a little bit more insight on this matter. But I think in terms of the guidance there, we really want to ensure that we provided all of the references, the resources, and the supports to both our educators as well as our public and family. Mike or John, if either of you want to jump in, I think that would be great.
Dr. Johnson, I can jump in here. And
Okay,
I agree with everything that you said about how important it is that for IEP teams to ensure that birth and adoptive parents remain involved in the special education process when their child is in foster care, absent termination or limitation of parental rights. It's also of critical importance that our IEP teams know, as you mentioned, Chair Joseph, and understand the process for securing a surrogate parent when necessary. The publication of an updated surrogate parent manual is a priority for us and is something that we are hoping to be able to release before the end of this school year. As Dr. Johnson said, we will accompany that with a wide range of training, including publicizing the completion of that surrogate parent manual and Principals Digest and Field Support Weekly. We'll also conduct trainings for our field support staff, our CSE chairpersons and leadership teams, our administrators of special education, our supervisors, school psychologists, and our psychologists and social workers. So we appreciate you lifting that here today and are working very hard to have that manual finalized and published by the end of the school year.
And you plan on training the staff and all of the
absolutely
all of the stakeholders in this space for students in care.
Absolutely.
Okay, I had another question about well, I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions about accessing student records. I know when I was in the foster care system, it was hard for me to access my son's records. When the parents are TPR, that's their rights are terminated. I know it takes a long time for me to have access. Matter of fact, when my boys came to care, they came with no papers at all, nothing. So it was hard. They came just as they were, no birth certificate and nothing. So it was hard for me to access those records. It was hard for me to get information from the schools, even though my name was on the papers and they said all of this. She's now the foster parent. And how do you ensure that parents like myself, other parents across the city who want to be foster parents, that they can access these school records? And it's usually, I think the parents must wait 45 days for it to happen. So will the DOE commit to having a new foster care system to change the practice to ensure parents and foster care agencies have access to educational records as students in foster care? And if you do, what are the timelines and what is that looking like?
No, thank you for the question, Chair. We intend to take a deep look at this issue. And I think it's one of the, it's one of the reasons why we're pushing, why we've launched this office, is to really understand the experiences and then figure out what are the strategies and systems to put in place to mitigate those. I will defer to my colleague, Mike, who's had greater experience with accessing the records, student records, and he'll give us an explanation of some of the work. Can we unmute Mike, please?
Thanks, Dr. Johnson. And thanks for the question, Chair Joseph. I would say two things about this. Certainly in our work with students in temporary housing, we're very familiar with the challenges of around enrollment, for instance. In those instances, fortunately, we're kind of protected by McKinney-Vento, which includes the right for students to enroll immediately, even without full documentation in a school once they relocate. I will be honest here, I am new to the work around students in foster care, and I need to myself get familiar with the obligations that the DOE has to ensure things like prompt enrollment and support with accessing the appropriate documentation for students. I see Julie's hand raised, so I'll defer to her in just a moment, but I do want to say that just complete agreement here with Dr. Johnson that we want to ensure that schools very consistently hold this knowledge so that we don't run into those exceptions where, a school secretary or an enrollment team member is somehow confused or misconstruing guidance around supporting enrollment and dealing with documentation, which still remains a challenge. And we're very hopeful that this new team can bring much deeper consistency and fidelity to schools and districts so that we don't run into these same issues on a consistent basis. Julie, I'll turn to you.
Thank you. And I know our teams from ACS and DOE are working very closely together on this issue. So I know it's an issue that both ACS and DOE are very focused on. And I think the issue has been is that typically the systems are set up to provide access to the adult with whom a student resides. And so obviously, when a child is in foster care, they're residing with the foster parent. And my understanding is that our teams have been working together to ensure that the foster parent has access, the parent has access, and the foster care agency has access, so that all three of those parties have access to the various systems that have information about the student, and that when there are, issues or challenges with that, our office works with your office. I think it's the Academic Policy and Systems Office and Student Information Systems with troubleshooting. But, the goal is that all three of those entities, when appropriate, would have access to those various systems.
Okay. I had a okay. I will come back to that question. Thank you for that. Thank you. I wanted to find out, my colleagues earlier spoke about transfer schools. I wanted to find out, in these meetings, are language access available for non-English? Because I do get calls about, as a council member, as an educator, I do get calls as families that are now looking for culturally relevant placements. Are language access available for students through the DOE and through the different agencies? ACS, you can answer that for me as well. If you have an answer, is language access available for children coming into care that English is not their first language?
Thank you for the question, Chair. I'll defer. I'll allow Julie to start the information around kind of the initial experience of families.
Mm-hmm.
The answer to this is yes, for sure. Language access is absolutely available for children and for parents, either through staff, who speak the language, and or through translation services. It's obviously critically important to be able to communicate in children's and parents' languages, and so we have a whole function related to that.
So the staff that's hopefully pulling together this 11-member foster care staff will also have some type of language access for our immigrant families who do enter the foster care system. We do get a lot of immigrant families, because I do get the calls. I do get the calls through my office, either for language access or for some type of representation. So this office will also have language representation. The manuals and the information that will be placed on the DOE website will also have these type of information available.
So thanks again for the question, Chair. As part of the DOE and our communications, we work with the translation team to ensure that DOE communications are provided in multiple languages. And we do so within the time frame that it takes for us to really be able to secure kind of the translation resources and analyze those supports. At each of our schools, there are there are integrated or there are individual language supports that are available as aligned to the school and the school community. But it's definitely an area that I think may require some additional attention. And we too would be happy to have a better understanding of what the experience has been of families. If there are any opportunities for us to think about this more deeply, we would absolutely love to hear and learn more about that.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much. Earlier, we talked about transfer schools. How are transfer schools providing support for our, I noticed that in 2019, there was a report from ACS that numbers of 1 in 4 students were placed in transfer school. Can you tell us how many of the percentage of students are foster care students? And what are the changes, at least, they change school at least once a year. What are the percentage on the students that are changing once they arrive at the transfer schools?
Well, thank you for the question, Chair. As we look at the data for transfer schools, what I will say is that most of our young people who are in care, over 80% of the young people who are in care really do not end up changing schools. There's a smaller percentage of young people who do experience a change in school. We are gathering some of the data around the transfer school, demographics. And so I will likely have to get back to you on that specific data for this particular population.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I noticed that earlier you mentioned that each of the schools have a foster care coordinator or a liaison or point person. Does the foster care student themselves know that there's a liaison available to them to support them while they're in the schools?
So I will defer that question to Mike. But I will say that I'll defer that question to Mike. So thank you for that question. Mike, if we could speak, if you could respond to this question.
Thanks, Dr. Johnson. Yes, so historically, the training that's provided to liaisons always includes information about how to coordinate communication with students and with families, as well as with foster care providers. So we're trying to ensure liaisons are equipped in how to approach from a trauma-informed perspective interactions with students and families, and to, as Dr. Johnson said before, approach those with an awareness of balancing student privacy and the challenges of avoiding stigma with when a child is indicating that they are in distress, carrying an awareness of the additional risks or challenges they may be facing in their life to provide an informed intervention.
And so basically they do know and they don't know that there's someone available for them because of privacy laws, or do they know that they can reach out to someone, or let's say someone comes to goes to a school, do they know who their point person to guide them through, to be a support?
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate the clarification. So we actually, the liaisons themselves are disclosed by the school to the school community. They're also disclosed to foster care providers. We actually update the list of liaisons and share that with foster care providers about quarterly each year.
And I would just add that we also have Donna Brailsford on the line, who is our citywide coordinator, who's our interim citywide coordinator for child abuse prevention. So she can speak a little, she can add a little color to this response as well. So can we unmute Donna, please?
Yeah, bear with us just one moment.
Oh, not a problem.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. The designated liaison is actually the liaison for all child welfare involved cases. They are the liaison between ACS and the DOE, and specifically in individual schools. As mentioned, there are a small number of foster children in any one particular school. However, that liaison is the point person that the agency would reach out to if they need any support. that individual is not directly known to the child per se, but more to the agency and the foster parent.
And the school, is that also, is the person also identified to the school as well?
Yes, yes, definitely. All staff in the school would know this individual. This is the point person should any agency involvement need connections to the school system.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Thank you. Let's talk about attendance. Attendance does not look good for my students in care. I noticed that the average, ACS has a website, and the average attendance for 16 to 20-year-olds in care was only 58% last year. And that's not the average citywide. So what is the average attendance rate for students in foster care so far this school year, and how does that compare to students who are not in foster care?
Thank you for the question, Chair. I think what we recognize is that as you talk about attendance, that it is critically important. We cannot educate young people who are not present. And so joining us on the call is Sarah Jonas, and citywide attendance falls within her one of the areas of her supervision. So I'm going to ask Sarah to speak a little bit around absenteeism and attendance for our young people.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. So our year-to-date attendance for students in foster care is about 79% right now. About of our students that are currently in foster care, about 34% have missed 20% or more of their total days. And around 23% missed 30% or more. So we know that these are real challenges. I'm going to speak a little bit about sort of the process for addressing attendance issues, because I know you raised that as well. And we certainly know that our students in foster care face barriers, to attendance that go beyond those of their housing stable peers. So all of our schools closely monitor the attendance of students in foster care in grades K through 8, and they raise concerns to the foster care agency if there are student absences so that they can be immediately investigated. And this is done through that tiered response protocol that several of our colleagues have mentioned on the call today. Students in foster care fall under tier 3 of that tiered response protocol. And on the 3rd consecutive day of absence on which the parent or foster parent can't be reached, or for situations where no explanation or no adequate explanation for the absence is provided, then that's determined by the principal in consultation with the staff that are doing the outreach. On that 3rd consecutive day, that assigned school staff person for that attendance monitoring must do 2 things. So 1, they must immediately report the student's absences and the results of that outreach to the child's foster care case planner. Or if the school is unable to reach the case planner, the ACS Office of Education and Employment Initiatives. And 2, they must record the school's contacts with either that foster care case planner or the ACS Office of Education Support in the DOE mainframe. So those are some of the kind of required actions to take there. I think also important to note, as may have been mentioned earlier, is that the DOE and ACS have a data sharing agreement. And so the DOE receives the names of students in foster care monthly from ACS to disseminate to school communities. And DOE also provides ACS and foster care agencies monthly reports of student data regarding attendance as well. And so, this is obviously a critical issue. And these are some of the ways that we're currently, supporting that work as well. We also, continue to support all of our schools with strong attendance taking practices and having, again, those up-to-date lists of student in foster care. And, we continue to work with district teams and schools to ensure that they have that. We also are supporting innovative attendance data tools so that to monitor attendance. And this is, a best practice that we're continuing to grow and model in part on a pilot that we have with DHS on scaling some of our data tools to shelters over this past year. We're also very focused on making sure that our students have personalized one-to-one supports and that our foster care students have that personalized support to ensure that the right support is delivered at the right time. This could include things like mentors, advisories, tutoring, other types of supports that any kind of whole child supports that our students would need to address any barriers they're facing to attendance and to encourage, and support them in regular school attendance and engagement. And lastly, as has been mentioned here, we all recognize, I know that everyone here does as well, the critical importance of connecting our schools, students, and families to community resources and partnerships, including through city agencies and community partners. And again, how critical these are to removing barriers to attendance for our students and their families and forging those really strong community connections.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you for that, appreciate it. We talked about also earlier about grade retention. When we reviewed, especially when I reviewed the Interagency Foster Care Task Force, I realized that 22% of our student in foster care has repeated a grade compared to 6% of the students citywide. Do you have an updated figure for the statistics?
Thank you for the question, Chair. What we do know, I will have to get back to you with the actual updated number. But we do know that our young people continue to experience challenge, and that challenge is reflected in academic performance as well as behavioral outcomes. And so we'll definitely get back to you with that data.
Okay. I noticed earlier my colleague was talking about suspension rates. We noticed that students in foster care, they get principal suspensions compared to students that are not in foster care. They get superintendent suspensions as well. Is there any type of restorative justice versus suspension put in place for students in special needs? Special foster care, especially coming in from the environment, trauma. How do we do transformative work with them versus suspended versus principal and superintendent? And these things go on their records.
Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned at the start, the Office of Safety and Youth Development is also part of my portfolio. And one of the things that the team has worked on over the last few years is really transforming the ways in which the school responds to, I don't even want to call it non-compliance, but disruptions. And what we realized is that there were a significant number of instructional days being lost. And over the last 2.5 years, we've really worked to really offer sets of alternatives to suspension, but also challenging both school leaders to think creatively around interventions and social and emotional supports that they can put in place prior to reverting to suspensions. And while I can share the data with you at another time, we've made significant reductions in the number of suspensions, both principal suspensions and superintendent suspensions. We also revamped the citywide behavioral expectations, which is a shift from calling it a discipline code. So it's not necessarily when you do wrong and how we're going to punish you, but just this idea of how do we set a clear set of expectations, and how do we ensure that young people are able to meet those expectations that we've set forth. I've worked in partnership with my colleague Flavia Perdomo. And so she can speak a little bit more to that, but I just wanted to lift that up, that across the city, we've made considerable interventions to really reduce how principals think about the practices, as well as thinking about integrating and expanding the number of restorative justice practices in schools that are in place. Flavia, if we could unmute Flavia, please.
Yes, I'm unmuted, Dr. Johnson, and thank you again, Chair Joseph, for lifting the question. What I will continue to add here is, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, that the focus has been on both changing policy, changing practice, and ultimately the other part, which is like changing hearts, right? And equipping educators on the ground to ensure that they have the tools, they have the skills to pivot to other ways that we can address behaviors in an non-punitive ways. So when it comes to the policy, as he mentioned, there was a lot of bold changes that have been done in the recent years to change the amount of days that a student could be suspended, and also look at infractions in an approach that's through grade band so that we can be grade appropriate. And that has, as a result, allow us to see some of the reductions that we have seen, which I know we report to the council twice a year on this area. And in terms of your question specific about what are the supports on the ground, so I think what we have really started to elevate in the recent years and continue to elevate now under the leadership of Dr. Johnson is to think through children and the support in a school and the young people to a tier approach when there's work that we're doing across the board for all of the students to strength core instruction in social emotional learning. For students in a targeted approach with some of our students in foster care will fit in that category, or just individualized support, and ensuring that for our 6 through 12 students that we are allowing for opportunities to staff members and school leadership to be trained on restorative practices. And for our young people that we are lifting some of the partnerships that we have with things like Harmony, which create routines and rituals that allow us to embed SEL practices into the school classrooms in a way that's aligned to CASEL, which is sort of like our best standard for SEL indicators and alignment. So I think is both ensuring that the policies really speaks to our value as an organization at the DOE, but also ensuring that if we want the adults to pivot to practices that are more non-punitive and focused on restoring, that we train them on that. And I think I will echo what I believe you may have listed earlier, like continuing to monitor that those practices are actually yielding the results that we expect to see is critical, right? And also figuring out ways to have student voice at the table, especially when we think about the 30% of the students that are impacted for foster, by being in foster care, and trying to figure out what works for them so that they're also a part of the solution or part of the things that we're putting in place, and that we get feedback and have cycles that we can monitor the implementation of all of these practices that we're listing.
Thank you. I'm going to read a little data for you. In 2021, 4-year graduation rate, New York City students in foster care was only 43%, which we talked, as compared to 81% for our students not in foster care. 17% of students in foster care dropped out, the highest dropout rate of any student groups in New York City. Given these data, what is the city doing to improve graduation rates, reduce dropouts specifically for students in care?
So thank you for the question, Chair Joseph. Really appreciate these thoughtful questions. As we look at the dropout rate and what we are doing specifically for young people, I think much of that is the work that we will be exploring and deepening and developing as part of the office, and working in collaboration with our other teams and colleagues. I think currently some of the supports that we offer is we provide a list of students who are in care to our BCOs, and schools use this to monitor the students, their attendance, in accordance with our Chancellor's Regulation A750. We also have the tiered response protocol, which Sarah mentioned, which is another way to really kind of monitor and prioritize young people's attendance who are involved in the structure. I think there are additional supports that are offered. I'm going to connect to Mike to talk a little bit more around some of the DOE-wide commitments and supports. And then I'm also going to ask Julie to jump in to talk a little bit around some of the supports provided as part of Fair Futures. So Mike, can you speak to?
Yes, thanks, Dr. Johnson. Yep. So yes, we're obviously very aware of these trends and concerned by them. In fact, the DOE allocated about $350 million in academic recovery funding to schools, and these funds were targeted to support students with the highest needs, including a weighting for students in foster care and school locations. So just to be clear, that $350 million was allocated to schools with a priority given to schools that had identified students in foster care, or we knew that had students in foster care enrolled in those locations. These funds are designed to support the targeted acceleration of student achievement coming out of the pandemic, and included strategic implementation of some evidence-based interventions that are matching students to social, emotional, and academic needs in cases where the needed student support would help meet the graduation requirements. So targeted funding, targeted interventions specific to graduation results. Julie, did you want to add something there?
Sure. Yes, and thank you, Council Member, for raising the issue about high school graduation rates. This is an area where we all need to pull together and do everything that we possibly can to assist young people. As I mentioned, unfortunately, many children, when they enter foster care, are already behind academically. And so, we need to do everything we possibly can to get them back up to where they should be and to ensure that they're not losing further ground. The other thing that I think has also been discussed in the hearing is that about 40% of the young people are in special education. And I think, Chair, you were pointing out earlier, the concerns with the disproportionate representation. And I think what I would add to that is that what we want to make sure is that children who need special education services are getting them, but we certainly don't want children to be over included in special education, if they can be served in mainstream. So not sure if there's a right number for the proportion, but the key is making sure that, each child, of course, is evaluated individually and is getting the services that they need. But so the supports that we have been providing over the last couple of years really are in the Fair Futures bucket, as Michael mentioned, with additional intensive tutoring that is specifically designed to be working with kids who have experienced trauma, coaching, as I mentioned, having dedicated coaches for older youth who are doing everything from calling them in the morning saying, hey, you're going to school, how's your after school program going? Let me help you with an internship, right? It's sort of a by whatever means necessary approach with the coaches. There are also middle school specialists. I just also want to mention that there are middle school specialists in Fair Futures because the transition, obviously, from middle school to high school is a moment. And students, first of all, need help with the high school selection process. And so there's a lot of help being provided to students, parents, and foster parents around that. And so sort of the combined efforts of what's happening through Fair Futures and the additional supports that our colleagues at the DOE are providing are essential and must continue and only accelerate in order to move this group of children forward academically.
Thank you.
Thank you. You were going to say something, Dr. Johnson?
Yes, Chair Joseph, thank you for allowing me. I just wanted to add, if we speak specifically around this population, we also communicate. So we'll share academic data to our foster care agencies around promotion and doubt, summer school requirements and assignments. But I also would say that a key contributor to the reduction of dropout rates is young people wanting to come to school. And so we think about kind of some of the supports and the wraparounds that are afforded to them through Fair Futures, but also through innovative school models and school practices like transfer schools. And so in these smaller settings where there are often real intentional community-based partnerships, structured supports. They create the conditions that make young people feel at home. And as a former educator, well, as I was told, we're never former educators. As a current educator,
always an educator.
So as a current educator, one of the things that is the conditions that are created. I think the teams at transfer schools have an appreciation for young people who have experienced challenges, both academic, but we know with those academic challenges come social challenges and other experiences. And so there is a level of love, care, and attention that is afforded by both the leadership and the teams in that space that really enable us to really provide some impact and some intervention for those young people. But there still is more to be done because 17 is still a number that is too high. And how we think about our strategies and systems that we put in place. I just wanted to add that to the response.
Thank you so much. One quick question. During COVID-19, what type of support were afforded to students in foster care?
That is a great
technology in terms of support, Wi-Fi. We know that was one of the biggest challenges our students face. I was in the middle of that hot mess that the pandemic created, setting up iPads and Chromebooks and all of that. How did we support our students in care during COVID and still during this time?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Much of that work was coordinated through our team. So I'm going to defer to Mike to speak a little bit more around what some of those coordinated supports would have been.
Thanks, Dr. Johnson, and thanks for the question, Chair Joseph. At the very beginning of the pandemic, we knew that we were potentially facing a very significant crisis in terms of access to the technology that students and families would need to support remote learning. In fact, at that time, the DOE went through a very fast process of acquiring, you might recall, iPads that were equipped with a cellular plan, so it wouldn't rely on Wi-Fi service in a given location, whether it was a shelter or otherwise. And for older students, iPads that came with cases that included a keyboard and stylus, just acknowledging that older students have different interaction needs than younger students. In the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, we issued more than 20,000 iPads, including to all of our students living in shelters and all the students we identified as living within foster care. So the DOE, I think, was very quick off the mark in recognizing the need and getting devices out there. Now, over the course of the following spring and summer, in addition, ultimately, we distributed over 800,000 devices. I mean, just an extraordinary number of devices over this past couple of years. But we've also built in dedicated technical support for our shelter partners. This meant including real-time in-person technical support on-site in shelters. And we worked very closely with both shelter and foster care providers to ensure that they were able to direct young people and families to the dedicated helplines for supporting those populations. Julie, did you want to add something as well?
Yeah, just I do want to say DOE and ACS partnered together extremely effectively and really did. I want to underscore what Mike said about getting devices to young people in foster care. And then, as additional young people came into foster care, we had a process to make sure they were getting devices. And so the other thing I want to mention is that throughout the pandemic, ACS and DOE have collaborated on a number of occasions to host information sessions for parents and foster parents who just were trying to figure out remote learning and COVID and, all of the, the various things that, all of us who have parents in school were dealing with throughout the pandemic. And so those were very well attended and very effective. And we are continuing to collaborate to host sessions like that, sort of unrelated to the pandemic, because it's obviously a great opportunity to share information with parents and foster parents about school-related issues. But it was very impactful during the pandemic in particular.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's all of my questioning. If I have any questions, I'll send them over. Malcolm?
Thank you, Chair. And that concludes testimony from the administration. So thank you everyone from DOE and ACS that was here today. And next, we're going to turn to public testimony. I just remind members of the public to wait for the Sergeant at Arms to give you the cue to go ahead. We're first going to hear from Andres Astembe, Erica Palmer, Dr. Brenda Triplett, and Melinda Andra. And then we will hear from Caitlin Passaretti, Joni Rivera, Karen Price, and Joseph Alexander. And we just ask folks that right before they begin their testimony to say the name and the organization they're with for the record. So first we will turn to Andres Astembe.
Hello. Time starts now.
My name is Andres Sasipinde, Youth of Good Shepherd Services. I was told to answer 2 questions for my testimony. The questions were, what is coaching for you? And how do you feel about aging out of care? To answer coaching experience, I always say that Crosby is my life coach, mainly because that is the most apt way of describing how she guides me. She connects me with great opportunities for me to expand my skills.
Andres, you keep cutting in and out. If it happens again, you may want to turn off your video, but keep going, but you keep cutting in and out. Just wanted to let you know.
I'll turn off my video for more stability. I'll just say my final sentence to my first question. I am grateful for her guidance and her support in my final years in the foster care system. Someone who has lived in New York all my life, my greatest fear was homelessness. My years in foster care have lessened my fear. However, I'm occasionally anxious that once I do have a place to live, it will not last long. While I'm anxious, I don't doubt the experience a bright future for myself. I can answer.
Andres, it keeps cutting in and out, so we didn't get every.
For me.
So Andres, we didn't get everything because you kept cutting in and out. So if you want to restart your computer, go ahead and I can call on you again so you can just repeat once more what you said. So if you want to try restarting your computer because it cut out throughout the whole time. And then when I see you come back on, we'll turn back to you.
I'm currently in my room in my foster home, and I don't get the best signal from this spot in the house. So I don't think restarting will help me any.
Okay. And I know you did submit testimony for the record. So I saw that in our inbox, so we'll make sure it gets included.
I can send you the written form of my testimony if you'd like.
Yep, no, that would be, we already got it, but just go ahead and send it again. And for anybody else watching, testimony should be emailed to testimony@council.nyc.gov. But Chair, I think he just points to a great example of the challenges faced by students in foster care. He wasn't even able to testify at this hearing.
Thank you.
So thank you, Andres. Next, we'll turn to Erica Palmer.
Time starts now.
Thank you. So my name is Erica Palmer. I'm a supervising attorney at Advocates for Children, and I direct our foster care project. In recent years, the city has begun to recognize the unique needs of youth in foster care. With the backing of the council, Funding for Fair Futures has enabled foster care agencies to hire staff to support students' education and employment goals. However, we need to see an equal commitment on the part of the Department of Education. To fully address the needs of students in foster care, the DOE must guarantee transportation for these students and move forward with its plans to hire the full team for students in foster care. I want to point out that of the 4 positions Dr. Johnson mentioned earlier today, only one seems to be solely focused on students in foster care. The other 3 positions seem to combine responsibilities for students in foster care and the much larger population of students experiencing homelessness. Despite its legal obligation, the DOE does not guarantee bus service or comparable transportation to students in foster care currently. Reimbursing for car service is not comparable. The DOE allows students in care who do not meet other criteria to apply for busing using an exceptions request form and will provide bus service if a student can be added to an existing route. However, foster care agencies are finding that it can take months for a student to be placed on a bus if a route exists at all. While students in foster care are waiting for busing, the DOE will provide a MetroCard or reimburse foster care agencies for the cost of car service. For students who cannot travel alone, this requires an adult to accompany the student, and that is where the system is breaking down. Foster parents who have a job or other children in the home simply cannot commit to spending 4 hours each day bringing their child to and from school, at least not long term. Just last week, I learned of a student who had to change schools because of their foster parents' work schedule. That student, who has an IEP, was suspended after attending their new school for only 1 day. Foster care case planners also cannot fulfill their job responsibilities to reunify families and keep children safe if they have to spend hours every day bringing children to school. Finally, although the DOE will reimburse foster care agencies for the cost of car service, they will not reimburse agencies for the cost of chaperones to accompany students. While the DOE has made progress with transportation, these changes ultimately do not help students if they are not promptly provided with bus service following their placement in foster care. Moving forward, the DOE must provide bus service or other door-to-door transportation to students in foster care who need it to maintain their school placements. I like to spend the rest of my time telling you about a middle school student whom I'll call Daniel. Daniel came into foster care during the pandemic. Like many young people in care, he struggled adjusting to his new home and was moved several times before settling into his third foster home. Luckily, Daniel was able to maintain his school placement. Academically, Daniel was an average student, but he sometimes had behavioral outbursts at school, likely because of the trauma he had experienced. This past winter, Daniel was reunified with his mother on a trial basis. Daniel's mother struggles with mental health needs that became worse when he went home. Ultimately, Daniel had to come back into foster care when his mother threatened him with a knife. Shortly after that incident, Daniel received a superintendent suspension from his school. We tried to explain Daniel's situation to his principal, but the principal refused to listen. In fact, he hung up the phone before we could share the details of Daniel's story. Daniel was reinstated in school soon after the suspension hearing, but at that point, the damage had been done. He began refusing to go to school. His attendance has decreased dramatically, and he started staying out after curfew to the point where his foster parent became concerned for his safety, and he actually had to be hospitalized. What difference could a DOE team for students in foster care make for students like Daniel? Such a team could analyze suspension data for students in foster care, identify schools that need training on how best to support youth in care, and identify schools that need monitoring to change their practices. A team could also propose a policy change requiring schools to take a child's foster care status into account when determining their disciplinary response. If a school refused to do so, parents, foster care agencies, and advocates would have somewhere to go for help. Nearly every week, I hear about another student like Daniel. Based on the stats Ms. Puello-Perdomo cited earlier, 8.5% of superintendent suspensions go to students in foster care, even though students in foster care make up less than 0.7% of DOE students overall. Let that sink in. If we want to improve long-term outcomes, including attendance and graduation rates for students in foster care, we must ensure that school is a place where students in care feel safe and supported, rather than a place where they feel unsafe, unwanted, and let down. This will not happen magically. The DOE needs people whose job it is to make it happen. I'm glad to hear that the DOE is hiring some of the previously envisioned positions, but we want to ensure all the promised positions move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll turn to Dr. Brenda Triplett.
Time starts now.
Brenda Triplett, Children's Aid. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you, Chair Rita Joseph and the members of the Education Committee for this important opportunity to present testimony to you today about youth in foster care in the City of New York's Department of Education. My name is Dr. Brenda Triplett. I am the Director of Educational Achievement and Partnerships in the Child Welfare and Family Services Division of Children's Aid, one of the largest and oldest child care welfare agencies in New York City. I am a retired public school educator, administrator, with approximately 35 years of public school service, and someone who also proudly served as a foster parent for several years. I bring a very unique perspective to the issues impacting children and youth who attend public school and who also happen to be a part of the foster care system in New York City. I have firsthand accounts of these very real challenges, and in my time today, I will share a few of the stories that illustrate the urgency of these needs. Students in foster care who are disproportionately Black and come from the city's poorest communities are among the most likely to repeat a grade, be chronically absent, or leave high school without a diploma. You've heard the testimony today. These chronic absences have real stories and experiences behind them. Take, for instance, the story of a young high school student, I'll call her Aaliyah, who was in foster care, who suffered from a severe PTSD and had experienced domestic violence and trauma. She was an honor student, and she was placed in foster care in a home quite a distance from her high school. Because she was a teen, the DOE only provided her with a Metro card to travel back and forth from school. However, due to her severe anxiety, fueling her fear of traveling alone, this was not a viable option for Aaliyah. Her team at Children's Aid submitted a request to the Office of Pupil Transportation to safely get her to and from school via busing. However, it took over a month for a route to be identified to serve this student. In the meanwhile, Aaliyah was absent from school and has now fallen severely behind in major content areas. While Aaliyah was once excited about school and was actually thriving academically, she has now lost her motivation to even graduate, and she no longer expresses an interest in college. Students in foster care experience a lack of stability in many areas of their lives. However, ESSA guarantees youth in foster care the right to school stability. Yet the DOE has refused to guarantee needed transportation to students in foster care. To address their needs, the DOE must move forward with plans to hire the full-time team it promised, and then to focus on students in foster care and guarantee the critically needed transportation in order to maintain school stability. This lack of transportation, it impedes the progress and success of our students in care. Another story I'd like to share is that of a first grader, I'll call him Scotty, who has an IEP and he was placed in an ICT classroom in Brooklyn. He was a good student, but presented some behavioral concerns due to trauma. His school was actually working to update his IEP with additional supports, and they were working on creating a BIP, a behavioral intervention plan, to support his needs. Scotty was making progress, and the staff and faculty at the school had a clear interest in the student's success. However, when the student's home was unexpectedly changed from Brooklyn to a school out of the borough, his progress was put in jeopardy. It was clearly in the student's best interest to remain in his Brooklyn school with familiar teachers, peers, and staff who knew him and cared for him. Accordingly, the Child Welfare Agency applied for transportation. The DOE was unable to identify an existing route, so the student was not granted transportation. Instead, the DOE advised that private transportation could be set up to transport Scotty to and from school, and that the DOE would simply reimburse the agency for travel expenses. Well, it's not that simple. As a first grader, Scotty required a chaperone to ensure his safe transport. The new foster parent, however, was unable to transport the child back and forth to school, as she was responsible for other young foster youth in the same home. And her backup was employed, so she was unable to help with the transport in the morning hours. Still, his team at Children's Aid went to great lengths to transport the student from school. In my closing, I would just like to say that Children's Aid, we recognized early on that we can't do this work alone. We need to more closely align policy with practice. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and please consider Children's Aid as a thought partner in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll turn to Melinda Andra.
Time starts now.
Melinda, you should see a request unmute. There we go. You're unmuted.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Melinda Andra. I'm an attorney in the Education Advocacy Project at the Legal Aid Society. The juvenile rights practice of the Legal Aid Society represents about 90% of New York City children in foster care. And I want to thank the Education Committee and Chair Joseph for holding this hearing, focusing on the needs of a very vulnerable student population that is often overlooked. I want to address 3 areas where the Education Committee has the opportunity to have a positive impact on the lives of children in foster care. The first is by providing funding and oversight to the DOE to ensure that students in foster care up to grade 6 have safe and reliable yellow bus transportation from their foster homes to school. Mr. Reisberg earlier testified that most students who requested an exception received transportation, but data provided by the DOE pursuant to Local Law 34 shows that during the period from January to June of 2021, 35% of the students who requested transportation received a Metro card. Giving a young child a Metro card, or worse, a ticket for Metro North, as Mr. Reisberg described, is not adequate. The guarantee of yellow bus transportation would provide students with school stability which they need and which they are legally entitled to. The second issue is the DOE team for students in foster care. Legal Aid created a specialized unit to address the needs of students in foster care more than 22 years ago. ACS soon followed and created a dedicated unit to promote educational success of youth in foster care 18 years ago. We're still waiting for the DOE to create their unit. Dr. Johnson and Mr. Hickey testified about the foster care liaisons, but the names and contact information for those individuals does not appear anywhere on the DOE website, making it difficult for us or parents or foster care staff to contact them. When we have been able to identify and contact the designated liaisons, it's our experience that these staff members are often surprised to learn that they are the designated liaison. They're not aware or actively engaged in informing their DOE colleagues of the rights or needs of students in foster care. Just last week, I was consulted on the case of a 4-year-old child in foster care. The child attends a pre-K program at a New York City public school. He has behavioral challenges, and the foster parent's getting phone calls before 11 o'clock almost every day, asking her to come pick him up. In October, his foster parent, the foster care agency, and his teacher agreed that he needed an evaluation for special education services, but his parents' whereabouts were unknown, and there was no one to sign consents for him. What should have happened is that a surrogate parent, probably the foster parent, should have been appointed as the decision maker so that this child would have someone in his life who could make decisions for him. But no one at his school, including the designated liaison, knew the steps they had to take to appoint a surrogate. So this child has languished all year long. Had the school staff been trained in how to appoint a surrogate parent? Had there been an office they could consult in the DOE? Had the DOE ever finalized and distributed the surrogate parent guide, which has been drafted but under review for about 4 years, this child might have already been evaluated and might have been receiving the services that he needed. He might have been in school for full days all year long, and he could have had a chance at starting kindergarten in September on par with his peers, but none of that has happened. During his testimony before this committee on March 21st, Chancellor Banks stated that hiring would begin for some of the positions for the team for students in foster care, but only one of the positions that has been described today focuses entirely on students in foster care. That's not sufficient to address the needs, and we ask the administration to prioritize the hiring for the entire team. The third issue I want to talk about is the use of exclusionary discipline. While before the pandemic, there had been progress in reducing the number of out-of-school suspensions, this year we are seeing our clients being suspended at higher rates than ever before. Students in foster care are disproportionately subjected to exclusionary discipline practices that push them out of school and into the school to prison pipeline. These students have caseworkers and legal representatives who want to support them at suspension hearings and manifestation determination reviews, but it is rare that foster care agencies and birth parents are informed and receive written notice of these proceedings before they happen. They usually only hear about them if they happen to speak with a school or if a foster parent informs them. When parents and foster care agencies are informed about the proceedings, they can support students. They can arrange for students to have representatives at hearings, and they can ensure that the professionals working with children have the opportunity to provide input at school meetings. So we're asking the City Council to consider amending Chapter 19 of the New York City Administrative Code, the reports on discipline and certain emergency transports of children, to require the DOE to report on the number of students in foster care being suspended or transported by EMS. And we also ask the City Council to require the DOE to report on whether the parent, foster parent, and foster care agency received written notice. Thank you for listening, and thank you for considering the needs of the city's most vulnerable students.
Thank you. And next, we will now turn to Caitlin Passaretti, Joni Rivera, Karen Price, and Joseph Alexander. We'll first start with Caitlin.
Time starts now.
Thank you. My name is Caitlin Passaretti. I'm a Policy and Advocacy Associate from the Citizens Committee for Children of New York, an independent multi-issue child advocacy organization dedicated to ensuring that every New York child is healthy, housed, educated, and safe. I would like to thank Chair Joseph and all the members of the Committee on Education for holding this hearing on students in foster care and the Department of Education. In part due to the trauma of their lives being uprooted through the child regulation system, students in foster care are more likely to be chronically absent or leave high school without a diploma, which was discussed in length in the hearing today. In fact, 20% of students in foster care repeat a grade compared to only 6% of all DOE students. Students in foster care were also impacted particularly hard by the closure of schools during the pandemic, and still in 2021, only 43% of students in foster care graduated from high school within 4 years, which is 38 percentage points lower than students not in foster care. Addressing the needs of students in foster care is fundamentally an issue of equity, particularly given the disproportionate representation of Black and Brown students in the foster care system. It is evident that there is a need for devoted staff to help support coordination, policy development, transparency, and overall increased efficiency and support for students in foster care and their families and support networks. This past fall, the DOE finally announced that it would hire a small team of staff to focus on students in foster care. While on this hearing, we were told the job postings are available, we still want to ensure that all the promised positions move forward, specifically those focused solely on students in foster care. Furthermore, the DOE has received an increase in state and federal funding, meaning there is no reason to impose or slow hiring for positions designed to support one of the most marginalized groups of students. The administration's desire to find cost savings and efficiency should not and cannot come on the backs of students in foster care. We urge you to ensure the DOE hires its first ever team focused on students in foster care as expediently as possible. The next issue I want to draw your attention to is the issue of transportation to school. While both federal and state law require the city to provide transportation to students in foster care so they can remain in their original schools, the DOE is not guaranteeing any form of consistent transportation to these students. This is causing severely, deeply harmful disruptions for students in foster care, including forcing them to transfer schools or foster homes to be able to access an education. Being in foster care is disruptive enough for a young person. The DOE must do everything in its power to ensure that students in foster care are supported and, at the bare minimum, can get to school. During the 2019-2020 school year, 1 in 5 New York City students had to change schools upon their initial placement in foster care. This disruption of students' lives and education is unacceptable and unjust. We ask the City Council to ensure that this city budget includes $5 million for the DOE to provide bus service or other door-to-door transportation to students in foster care who need it to maintain the school stability. I thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Joni Rivera.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joni Rivera, and I'm the Assistant Vice President of Educational Services at the New York Foundling. The Foundling is one of New York City's oldest and largest nonprofit providers of human services. And with support from the city, our education programs provide tutoring and educational advocacy services to students involved with the child welfare system. At the Foundling, we have made a major commitment to education and believe it is one of the primary components of a child's well-being. Without an adequate education, our children cannot thrive and suffer increased risk of mental health issues, poverty, homelessness, and encounters with the criminal justice system. Funding for education in the foster care system is a critical need, one that has become even more apparent during the global pandemic. COVID-19 is creating new obstacles for students in foster care, with routines disrupted and foster parents often struggling to juggle their own jobs with their children's schoolwork. Our students are also forced to navigate the school system without proper support and resources. Approximately 50% of students in foster care have an individualized education program, or IEP. Without proper support, these challenges often fly under the radar, and our students do not receive the services that they need to be successful in the classroom. The current global pandemic has also exacerbated these already dismal academic outcomes for students in foster care. Students in care are going to emerge from the COVID crisis further behind academically than ever before. We are asking that we have a fully staffed, dedicated office at the Department of Education for students in foster care. It is imperative to improving educational outcomes for our students. A dedicated office and knowledgeable staff can assist in closing the achievement gap by providing students in foster care with the support and resources they need to be successful. Education staff with training in trauma-informed practices, foster care policies and practices, as well as the rights of students and families in foster care is integral to properly support students in the DOE. These resources will provide students and families with access to special education supports in a timely manner, minimize educational disruptions and transitions, and bolster confidence and trust within the education system for families experiencing child welfare involvement. Transportation is another significant need for students in foster care. The DOE must provide bus services or other door-to-door transportation to the relatively small number of students in foster care who need it to maintain school stability. Students experience a multitude of transitions and moves during time spent in care. Educational disruptions can result in months of lost learning, gaps in special education services, and increased trauma already experienced by entering into foster care. With so much in transition, it is imperative to keep students stable in their school environment with teachers and staff that they trust, services they need to be successful, and friendships that they rely on to thrive. Consequently, our students need improved transportation services to ensure that they are able to remain in their schools of origin and minimize disruptions, so days are not lost waiting for busing or managing car service for a family with multiple children. These issues can weigh heavily on our foster parents, who are often working full-time and caring for multiple children, all while trying to provide the best care for their children. For example, we had a student whose busing was removed from his IEP last year due to the pandemic and the switch to remote schooling. However, at the start of this year, he required busing to return to in-person, and his school refused to put it back on his IEP. Being that he is now in the 7th grade, he fell into the exception policy, but was not granted the exception to busing from the DOE. As a result, his busing was not put into place immediately, and he required months of car service, which put an undue strain on his foster family to provide car service back and forth to school. I want to close by thanking the City Council for its support of many of our programs, but we need to do more. We look forward to continuing our partnership with the City Council to prevent students in foster care from falling through the cracks. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And next we will turn to Karen Price.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Karen Price. I'm a foster parent coach with Graham Windham, and I'm here to share some stories from our foster parents. So thank you so much. During the pandemic, when schools shut down and children were remote, there were 3 4th and 5th graders who were able to attend remotely. But when schools went back in session, they could not get to school because there was no busing in place, because there was no contract between DOE and OPT. Foster parent Mrs. M, we'll call her, was determined to get these 3 kids to school. They had been isolated long enough. She had no choice but to take taxis for 2 hours going to multiple schools to drop off and pick up the children. She had to drop one 5th grade student off so early that it was before school breakfast. The child would be staying with the staff at the school office, and then she would rush to the 2nd school so that child could get to school on time. Let me mention this long-standing foster parent has underlying health conditions, and these schools were on the opposite side of Brooklyn. This went on for over a month before busing was put in place. The foster parent had an educational neglect case called in on her for her own children because she was struggling to get everyone to school on time. Allow me to share another example. Another foster parent asked for busing for her 3 special needs children. One child went to a specialized school in the Bronx, one went to Manhattan, and the 3rd child went to school in Brooklyn. The foster parent worked very hard to make sure all the children would have all the services and supports they needed to feel confident in school. And so she was determined to get everyone to school on time. Busing was not in place. It was a strain to her and her family, and she ended up having to leave her job. It was just too much for her to juggle at that time. And finally, I want to share one more story, one that even today we are still fighting. A foster parent is caring for a 2nd grader who needs busing. ACS provided busing for the first 2 weeks, and then it ended. even though they knew that there was no DOE transportation in place. The second grader was given work to take home, which was great, but was marked absent from school for the month that she was without busing. These are just a few of the painful and heartbreaking stories where our city systems are actually disorganized and communication is not clear. Busing is fundamental for students and for the foster parents who care for them. The delays create the undue stress, placement disruptions, and a few foster parents have even considered and have closed their homes because the supports are not supporting them and their families. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. And next we'll turn to Joseph Alexander.
Time starts now.
Thank you for your time. I'm Joe Alexander from the CEC District 15. I'm also a parent of 3 children. I'm a foster parent and recently adoptive parent of a teenager. Professionally, I'm the supervising clinical psychotherapist for the New York Foundling. I provide mental health treatment in therapeutic foster care. If you're not familiar with that term, that's generally our kids at the highest level of need in New York City, kids with significant trauma and experiences that really led up to their mental health issues. I should also mention that I'm a former foster child and youth myself. So we've heard a number of approaches today. And as I've sat here listening and I've been kind of confused, like, am I not aware of any specific targeted opportunities for the kids I work with or my own kid? And then it really kind of struck me today that a lot of the things that we're talking about, for instance, the social emotional growth, the screeners, the trainings that are being implemented, the curriculum, hiring of a massive amount of social workers and increasing the number of guidance counselors that are in the schools. Those are like, if we woke up tomorrow and magically foster care didn't exist, those programs would still exist. They're not targeted at kids in foster care with foster kid experiences. That's just programs serving the general DOE population. It adds nothing to the kids that we're here to discuss today. But most, if not, the only program I can think that we've talked about today that actually does address specific needs of kids in foster care is Fair Futures. And that's Fair Futures that does that work. Thank you for what they do. But I'm really disappointed I would imagine there's a fair number of people on this call that are disappointed that, like, we can just say that, oh, a kid in foster care, we take their IEP needs really seriously. And it's like, well, that's not been my experience. As a CEC member, I talk to parents in my own community, and earlier this year, on one single block, I was talking to 2 parents that live about 5 doors down from each other. They both own a brownstone, in Windsor Terrace, a very nice neighborhood, right? And one of their kids was accused of being a bully, and this had been going on for a long time. He was bullying kids in his school. And this other child had some language issues as far as like pragmatic speech is concerned. And both parents were dissatisfied by how the school was handling it. They enrolled their kids, like one family enrolled their kids in a $40,000 a year school, in private school in DOE, or in New York City. The other one was like 30 grand. They paid out of pocket for this tuition. Their kids go to this school. And then they sued the DOE. DOE's going to foot the bill until I'm sure they graduate for bullying. Now, if this were a foster kid, I mean, this would be suspension after suspension. DOE would probably put this kid in a D75 school. And like, I think the really shocking part of this to me was that I've never met a foster kid who's given that kind of consideration. Professionally in the CEC, it's just, I've never seen it. So I do want to say that, like, I work with one kid. I manage her caseload. I'm not her therapist, but who, what is it, April 20th? She has speech language pathology on her IEP, and she's never had a session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. And I'm just going to say, for anyone that is in the Zoom that I have neglected to call on, people have been coming in and out throughout today's proceedings. If you just use the Zoom raise hand function, and I will call on you in the order with which you raise that hand. And not seeing any hands, Chair Joseph, I'll turn to you if you have any questions or comments for our panelists, and then your closing thoughts on today, and then adjournment.
For me, the comments are, today was heavy, as it's always been heavy on my heart, to see that this vulnerable population, that I was happy to be part of the foster care family and eventually adopting my 2 boys. So anyone who knows this is close to my heart, and it's something I will continue to fight. I want the advocates and the families to know that they have an ally, they have a champion who makes sure that I always raise my voice. I always get really mushy about this because it's just, the fixes are here. They're simple. Some of the asks are very simple. They're not a lot. They're already in place. Just make them work, partner up with the right people to make sure that these are happening. I was blessed enough not to go through some of the stuff that I'm hearing. And you're right, Joseph Alexander. That child would have been suspended many times over. The agencies would have to step in. They would have to go and fight for him, but that wasn't the case. And we see that, and I repeated that in my testimony. The suspension rate, the graduation rate, the absenteeism rate, the transportation. Those are basic of what I'm asking for, a fully staffed contact person at the DOE to make sure that these students are receiving the resources and the support that they need on every level. Being moved from one home, I go on vacation and I'm traumatized on my first night arriving wherever I go because I'm like a little anxiety, but being pulled away from the only home you've ever had, the only family you've ever had, to go live with strangers. Sometimes not everybody's a kingship. Like I mentioned before, not everybody gets the opportunity to have a kingship. These are strangers. I'm getting to know new people. This is a new home, new family. How do I adjust? How do I live? And to have school is supposed to be the safest place on the planet. And to have these barriers for these students, these are barriers we can easily remove. Meeting, talking, and making sure the needs are set out there. I can't stress that enough, that it's not rocket science, what we can do for our children. There's 7,000 of them, and 2 of them used to belong in that system were mine, my very own. So for the kids, I will continue to fight for you. For the advocates, you have a support. For the parents, thank you for doing what you do with your heart, opening your heart and your homes to this vulnerable population. I can't thank you enough. And for all those who testify, we hear you. I hear you and I listen to you. And that's all I have to say today. And
Before you adjourn, Chair, I did forget, I don't want the speaker to call me in her office. I forgot to recognize Councilmember Gennaro. Circled on my pad, just forgot the whole time, so.
Yes, you will be called to the principal office. Again, thank you again for everyone that joined us today, and we're gonna adjourn, and that's it, right, Malcolm? And here's my gavel.
That's, oh, very nice.